throughout our conversations here today. I would like to really thank all of you for being here, and there are so many of you in attending that if you could kindly put your name, organization, and where you're dialing from into the chat, it would be great to get a sense of where you're all calling in from, to build a sense of community and family, which is really one of our goals here today with our summit. We will also have a Q&A function throughout all of the panel discussions we'll be having today. So as the conversations are going on, feel free to put questions in the chat box through the Q&A functionality, and we will try our best to answer those throughout the day. At Bhumi Global, our mission is to engage, educate, and empower people and communities to address what we call the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And our work is based on Hindu principles of environmental care. We work to a world where balance is restored between humans and the natural world. And that is why we have convened this summit over the next 2 days to bring together a range of stakeholders from the worlds of faith, private sector, elected officials, youth, and development experts to discuss best practice and solutions for a healthier planet. We are also having these conversations on the eve of 2 major UN moments. The climate COP27 taking place in Egypt in just over a week's time, and then the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, which is taking place in Montreal in early December. So once again, I'm very excited and happy that you can join us here today. It is our honor that you have made your time available to participate in these conversations with us. Again, please put your name, where you're calling from, and the name of your organization into the chat as we start and build a real sense of community and belonging with each other. I'm excited for our opening keynote fireside conversation with 2 very dear friends and mentors of mine. I'm so very grateful they could join us. And I'm just going to ask them to come on as panelists while I introduce them. Our keynote fireside conversations will be with Dr. Iyad Abumoghli and Satya Tripathi. As I mentioned, both of whom are very dear friends and mentors. Here we are, we have them on screen with us. Dr. Iyad Abumoghli is the director of the UN Environment Programme Faith for Earth Initiative, who are co-partnering with us for this first day of the summit. The UN Faith for Earth Programme aims to encourage and empower and engage faith-based organizations as partners at all levels towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Dr. Iyad Abumoghli has over 27 years, maybe closer to 30 years now, of experience in the private sector, in the scientific realm, and with international organizations on sustainable development, water resource management, and environmental impact assessment. And before he was at UNEP, he served 14 years at UNDP in a variety of roles. And Satya Tripathi is the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. He is a development expert, an economist, a lawyer, a change maker with over 40 years of varied experience. He is also the Chancellor of the Kalinga Institute for Social Sciences, the world's largest academic institution dedicated exclusively to indigenous peoples and culture. He has served the UN for more than 2 decades in key positions and was most recently the UN Assistant Secretary General and the head of the New York office for the UN Environment Programme here in New York City. Satya and Iyad, it is so great to see you both. Thank you so much for making the time to be available with us today. I believe, Satya, you're calling in from New York, and Iyad, I believe you're calling in from Nairobi. So thank you for your time today. And we have so much to discuss, and we have a full day of programming. And so I really want to jump in with the first question to both of you, which I highlighted in my opening remarks, which is that we are facing what we call a triple planetary crisis. And Dr. Iyad Abumoghli, I'm wondering if you could just illuminate a little bit and unpack that for us a bit more, because oftentimes we focus a lot on climate and biodiversity and pollution doesn't get as much attention. So I'm wondering if you could explain how these 3 issues are interrelated, please.
Thank you very much, Gopal. It's a deep honor and pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you for the invitation and for this opportunity. The question that you are asking is a very critical question in today's discussions at the global level, and everybody is geared towards, trying to understand what is happening and how to answer these questions. The interconnectedness between the three areas that you have highlighted, which is climate change, nature degradation, and biodiversity, is called, as you said, the triple planetary crisis. The combination of these three environmental concerns is actually subjecting the planet to unprecedented challenges. We're talking about not only environmental challenges, but also associated socio-economic challenges. And these are challenging our own survival on the only planet that we live on. This is why the UN Secretary General called this a code red emergency, with the highest attention that is needed to be given to it. While each of these issues has its own causes and effects, and each issue needs to be resolved, solution must address our own way of development and growth. Climate change refers to the long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, and will completely alter the ecosystems that support life on Earth. Human activities are the main drivers for climate change, unfortunately. And almost everything we do releases emissions contributing to climate change. But energy, for example, industry, transport, buildings, and agriculture are known to be the main causes for the release of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. We all have seen the devastating floods in Pakistan. 1,700 people have lost their lives. The floods in West and Central Africa, while Eastern Africa is facing unprecedented droughts. The 500-year record drought in Europe, and what that is leading to in terms of global food insecurity. Moreover, on the long run, climate change will cause migration of people, will try to migrate from drought areas to more greener areas and so on, and will cause food insecurity and will increase conflicts over natural resources. If we continue without serious measures, the scientists estimate that we will get to 3 degrees higher in the same trends that we are moving on. In terms of biodiversity loss, which includes animals, plants, and ecosystems, the reasons for the biodiversity loss is also related to human activities related to overfishing, deforestation, and desertification due to climate change. Again, the interlinkages between the two issues. So biodiversity loss impacts food supplies, the clean water, without which there's no life on Earth. And scientists estimated in 2019 that 1 million plant and animal species will be lost or will face the risk of extinction. While pollution, the third pillar of the crisis, is the largest cause of diseases and premature deaths. Overall, it is estimated that 7 million people die prematurely every single year due to pollution, and 9 out of 10 people worldwide breathe air that contains pollutants. So pollution is caused by everything from traffic to factories to wildfires to volcanoes and other things. But another cause of pollution is actually caused indoor household use of non-sustainable access or sources of energy, and that causes around 4 million deaths every single year. Now, I am painting a bleak picture here, but I would say that there is hope and there is something good that is happening. At least from the UN system, we have adopted these planetary crises that we are facing, and have dedicated organizations, entire organizations, to work on them. And we are mobilizing through the intergovernmental dialogue systems, which we call the COPs, the Conventions of the Parties, to mobilize global action and to mobilize policies, to put, the rules of the game, to change the institutional behavior of the people, and to find solutions that are viable, that are nature-based, and that can continue, providing the same natural resources access to the following next generations as we had access to them. I think I would stop here and give the floor back to you, Gopal.
Thank you so much, Iyad, for illuminating and breaking down, what the triple planetary crisis is and kind of the actual impacts of those. And you were leaning into at the end there what progress is being made. I think many of us in this space are working and have worked hard for many, many years to move these things forward. Satya, you have been at the forefront of this, in a variety of capacities in every single part of the world. Satya, I'm wondering if you could share, how are we doing? Where are we when it comes to the state of the planet? Are we moving quickly enough? What more needs to be done? I'm wondering if you could illuminate on that for us, please. Oh, and if you could unmute yourself.
Thank you, Gopal, and greetings, Iyad. It's been a while since we saw each other. So I think two things are important. I wouldn't spend time on the crisis because Iyad has really framed that so well. But how are we doing is an easy and a tough question to answer. The easy part is that in 2003, if we had really woken up, we would need to reduce, and I'm quoting the emissions gap reports and the production gap reports and all, which your audience is quite familiar with, that UNEP's flagship work that happens every year. And so 2003, if we had really woken up, we would have to reduce our emissions by 3% every year. We didn't. And we went to even a deeper sleep as a community, as countries, as people, as corporations. 20 years later, it was 7%. And so much so that by 2030, we have to reduce our emissions intensity by 43% to remain viable, not as a planet, because it's often said that the planet is in crisis. The planet is not. The planet will be fine. It's the species, the humans, that are in crisis, and along with us, thanks to our unsustainable and terrible behavior, honestly, millions of other species are at risk. As he has rightly pointed out, scientists have told us that 1 million species are in the risk of being completely extinct in the coming years. And many have indeed started disappearing, and the IUCN Red List just keeps growing exponentially. But there is hope because what is happening is that we're seeing progress on 3 fronts. One is that countries and indeed international organizations are rising to the challenge. If you take the case of the UN Secretary General, I'm actually in Lisbon. I was delivering an opening keynote at the Planetary's World Gathering, and yesterday I was interviewed by CNN, and they were, of course, their favorite question is, the Secretary General is from Portugal. So the first question was, how is the Secretary General doing, or how is the UN doing? I said, that's not my place. I don't work for the organization anymore. But as much as I admire having worked for the Secretary General and for the organization, let me share with you this. I haven't seen any world leader in recent times making that point more emphatically than Antonio Guterres. And that's what I was telling CNN, because you see, people skirt around the issue. They try to be nice. Nobody wants to offend anybody. When your house is on fire, you stop worrying about offending people, especially people that have refused to act steadfastly over decades. And so that's where we are. And so more people like the UN Secretary General speak out, call out the fossil fuel companies, the banks that are putting money into these, and indeed countries that refuse to really rise to the challenge. The NDCs are to be revised, it was agreed in Glasgow, and we are just about to start the next COP. Only 15 countries have submitted their revised NDCs. I mean, you really have to be in magical thinking space to believe that this problem will go away. 5 years ago, we were already at 1.1 degrees of global warming. And then there are new catalysts coming into play that are telling us that things are just moving way faster than we imagined or scientists thought. And so that's a big challenge. The second, so that's encouraging. The second is that a lot of corporations that would otherwise be fudging and greenwashing, that's changing, and thanks to the work of UN and organizations such as yourself, putting their feet to fire as nicely as one could. And so they are actually coming up and saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to do these things. And unlike governments that change every 3, 4, 5 years, corporations are answerable in the longer term because their whole existence depends on it. Their stock exchange listings depend on it. And so that's very good. The third thing, and I think this is far more defining than the other two, is that the price of carbon is changing. In my own time at the UN, more than 2 decades that I spent there, carbon was selling at 20 cents a ton. Now it's at $22 a ton. And even the European Union has their internal pricing at 100 euros a ton. Although the prices are not there yet, but when those kind of market signals are given, and the faster it rises, and the more we find the signs and the mechanisms to prevent the leakages, so that people that are buying it know for a fact that there is no duplication and they are not paying for something that's not real. Actually, that will create the kind of impetus for good behavior. Because if you're going to have to spend on carbon for your unsustainable behavior, that will change the whole development architecture in terms of the trajectory towards sustainable production and consumption. So I think those three things really give us hope. People speaking out much more loudly, especially people whose voices matter, and private sector, which is 70% of the global GDP, trying to measure up to the situation, although much remains to be seen, and the price of carbon changing, the market maturing, and that will then allow even common people for little things to suddenly start doing things that will get them paid for their contributions and for their efforts, either get them paid in money terms or get them paid in terms of reduced expenses. It adds up to the same either way, Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for Iyad. And I'm sorry, Satya, thanks. And it seems like what I'm hearing you say is there's movement happening, but there's not at the same time. Like there seems like there's a movement at a civil society level, grassroots, private sector in some capacity. But at the international member state government level, the movement is far too slow. And I know a report came out today from UNEP saying that there is no feasible way that we're going to meet the 1.5 degree target now. And so, Iyad, I'm wondering, within this context of movement, but also indifference, what is the role of faith-based organizations within all of this? Because we know that faiths can be an actor, a mobilizer, a catalyst for action. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the importance of engaging faith and spiritual groups in this work.
Thank you, Gopal. Indeed, as you mentioned, everybody has a role. And member states cannot alone achieve the sustainable development goals or the targets on climate change and biodiversity and so on. So it needs all hands on deck. Now, for so long, the faith-based organizations have not been at the heart and center of action on global developmental issues, while they have been for centuries providing support to the livelihoods and the development of the people. Now, in terms of how can we mobilize the faith actors, and let's consider two important powers that I keep hammering every single speech that I talk on this subject. the convincing and convening power of religions and religious organizations, which, you will find faith leaders every corner of the world. So you have an agent of change wherever you go. That is unmatched. The UN system does not have that. No one organization or a collective system of organizations can have that. But religious institutions do. There is a Hindu in every country. There is a Hindu in every corner of India, for example. So there's a Muslim everywhere. Now, not only as a citizen, but currently you have a Hindu who is the head or CEO of a major organization or a major business that contributes to greening the world or browning it and polluting it. So we are, as religious leaders, we are in a very powerful positions, and this is the the convening power. The convincing power is that religions actually talk to the hearts of the people before they talk to the minds of the people. So whatever religious leaders say, we say amen, we bow, and we accept and we follow. So their power of the word is very important. So mobilizing faith leaders in terms of bringing people together, educating them, making them aware of the challenges and their individual and institutional responsibilities is very important. The second power is the economic power of faith organizations. And they are the fourth largest economic power on earth. So they own trillions of dollars. Now, as I mentioned, they have been supporting livelihoods and development of the people, but on the expense of what? Of course, on the expense of investing in oil and gas or environmentally non-sustainable investments. So remobilizing, redirecting these investments into moral investments that at least, reflects the values of their own religions is very important and will be a very important arm in financing sustainable development. That is the global agenda for everybody.
Thanks, Iyad, for laying that out so succinctly, convincing and convening, which I think is what we're trying to achieve with this 2-day Bhumi Global Summit, which is we're convening people and we're trying to convince them and convince all of us that we should do a little bit more. And also the economic power of faiths as well, which is very, very important. Satya, I'm wondering if I can turn to you and maybe ask you to take off maybe your professional hat and speak to in a personal capacity. We've spoken in the past about Hinduism and what Hinduism can contribute to creating a healthier planet. And you're from Bhubaneswar, which is a famous Hindu pilgrimage town with the Sun Temple and so close to Puri and so on. What would you like to see, or where do you feel the value add could be within the Hindu community, given that now it is a force, or Hindus are found in, as Iyad was saying, in every corner of the world, running major companies and development agencies and banks and so on. Where do you feel the Hindu community can add value when it comes to what we're talking about today?
Well, we need to go back to our roots, Hinduism is a way of life more than a religion, and that is because if you look at the Vedas or the Samhitas or the Upanishads, as we know, if I go back to the Vedas, Aranyakas, which are if you translate them into English, it is tales from the forest, because Aranya is wilderness, So, as far as back as then, nature ruled supreme in the ultimate consciousness of the evolved Hindu religious leaders, who would go into penance for months and years together and then come up with these words of wisdom that has then formed the bedrock of what we call the religion now. I studied these things very extensively as a youngster. And one that I remember very clearly from my younger days is the first shloka in Ishopanishad, or in English Isha Upanishad. It goes something like this: Ishavasya midam sarvam yatkincham jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjina magadam kasya siddhanam. What it means is that God pervades the entire universe. And it tells the followers, enjoy all of nature as gifts from God, but with a spirit of renunciation. Do not be attached to them. Do not covet the wealth of others and control your greed. I think this essentially encapsulates what we have forgotten along the way. That, and Mahatma Gandhi put it very nicely in a modern way, nature provides for every man's need, but not every man's greed. And so that's what we need to go back to, that the web of life, as Iyad put so nicely in his opening statement, which is also, we call it biodiversity, we call it nature, and all, is the web of life that supports all of us. And we have somehow climbed to the top of the species pyramid. We found some of the gifts of God, divine accident, if you call it, fire, opposable thumb, and locomotion, and what have you, and we spread ourselves around the world. We climbed onto the top of the species pyramid, and in our ultimate arrogance, we believe somehow that every other of the 8 million species exists to serve us, our interests, not that we are a part of a much bigger whole. That the little microbe that you can't see, once it vanishes, you're not going to grow any food. And if you believe in God, that is God. That little microbe is God, because that produces the food that feeds you and nourishes you for you to be able to create your Zooms and all the technology that you can then use to talk to people around the world. So I think Hinduism really brings that to the fore. If you are a believer, and I'm not talking religiously, I'm talking in a very spiritual way. And no matter what religion, every religion you pick up, whether it is Islam, whether it is Christianity, whether it is Judaism, nature is at the core of the essential beliefs in every religion. Compassion is at the core of the essence of every religion. Respect for other species is at the core of the essence of every religion. So if we really go back to the basics and put our arrogance and our vanity aside for a bit, we can indeed save ourselves and save numerous other species.
That's so beautiful, Satya. I couldn't have said it better myself. That opening verse from the Isha Upanishad is really like a North Star, a guiding light for so many Hindus who are concerned about the environment, that Ishavasya principle, that value that everything is owned and controlled by God, and we're all kind of little people in a cosmic systems. Thank you so much for sharing that. Unfortunately, we're getting close to coming to the end of our time, and so we need to wrap up and start moving to the first panel discussion. And this has been a great opening already, and I wish we could go for longer. And Iyad, I'm wondering if I could close out with you. Satya shared something that has inspired him, and inspires many millions of Hindus right across the world. Iyad, I'm wondering, on a personal note, if you could also share, for you personally, what inspires you, what keeps you going in this work?
Thank you, Gopal. And first of all, I would like to really pay my appreciation to Satya for putting a wonderful opening for all my upcoming speeches, because this is really wonderful. And telling the story from the basics of our beliefs and our understandings and teachings and so on. And you mentioned that all religions, they speak the same thing, they say the same thing, they all have appreciation to nature. And this is my inspiration. In fact, what inspires me is that there is a lot among humanity to meet and to work together than there is, things to divide them. So in all of our meetings, Gopal, you were there with us in the Faith for Earth dialogue sessions, where we had 700 participants. They're all from 93 religions. They're speaking the same language. And that's what keeps me, wanting to do more and pushing and bringing people together. Because if we can agree on our own existence, the shared planet, we can agree on how to live with one another in peaceful, harmonious system, and work on in a multilateral, interfaith collaborative system to solving all of our other issues. So there is hope in humanity, and there is richness in the diversity of religions and backgrounds that brings people even stronger together. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Iyad. Again, Iyad and Satya, thank you so much for your time this morning, for your opening remarks. Thank you on a personal level for your friendship and your guidance over many years. And this has just been a wonderful framing for 2 days of conversation. So thank you again so much for your time. And I hope we can get together soon for a coffee or a chai in New York or Nairobi or somewhere else. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All the best. Good luck.
So I'd like to now move to our first panel discussion of the day, which will be focused on how Hindu Mandirs, Sampradayas, and community organizations are leading on action. This conversation will be facilitated by Simone Jhingoor, who is the co-founder and the co-executive director of Jahajee Sisters, a gender justice organization based here in New York City that activates in the Indo-Caribbean New Yorkers to address the root causes of gender-based violence. She supports survivors of intimate partner and sexual violence to heal, while stepping into their full power as feminist leaders, organizing for cultural and systemic change on the local and national level. Simone is also, and we are very grateful, she is also an advisor to Bhumi Global, and we are so very happy that she is with us today hosting this panel discussion, and I'll be bringing in the other speakers as Simone wants to introduce them as well. Over to you, Simone.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Simone Jhingoor, and I'm a co-founder and co-director of Jahajee Sisters, in addition to serving on the advisory council for Bhumi Global. And I'm really grateful for this conversation today. And we'll be starting with an opening framing, and then we'll introduce all of our speakers and then pass it on to them to just share all of their wisdom. So I will wait till I see everyone and before I get started. Okay, perfect. I believe everyone is here, and hopefully VJ will, I know VJ is in Trinidad, so hopefully he will join us as soon as he can. Okay, everyone. So I want to just start off by just sharing the work that I do. So Jahajee Sisters is a gender justice organization that activates Indo-Caribbeans in New York to put an end to gender-based violence. Our community of support guides women, girls, and gender-expansive people to heal and create lasting change. Through arts activism, leadership developments, and grassroots organizing, we amplify survivor voices and visions to transform culture. So I want to start off by just sharing that I grew up in a very traditional Indo-Caribbean home where Hinduism was very much present in my life. And I didn't understand the impact that my faith had on my work until much later on. But one of the values that really drives my work as a social justice activist and leader is ahimsa, the belief in nonviolence in all forms. It's what guides my work with survivors. It's what guides my work for healing on a whole when I think about my relationship to the planet, and the way that I truly want to embody that idea in all that I do. And I also want to share that I approach my work from a very intersectional lens, meaning that I understand that there's many different paths that and identities that actually impact us as individuals when we think about climate justice, when we think about racial justice and gender justice. And I want to spotlight the intersection between gender justice and climate justice, because I think as we have this conversation, it's not an intersection that's lifted up enough. So just sharing quickly that Kimberly Crenshaw, the civil rights activist who coined the term intersectional feminism in 1989, describes intersectionality as a prism for seeing how various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other, right? So this approach creates an opportunity to connect various climate impacts to the root causes of a climate crisis, which is racism, it's colonialism, it's sexism, and it's capitalism. And these root causes combine to drive oppression and exploitation of both people and the planet. So as a result, we see that people of color, often indigenous peoples, poor people, immigrant people, folks that are living in rural areas, women, LGBTQ people, seniors, children, and differently abled folks are the most impacted, right? They have increased exposure to climate risk and are forced to continually battle the negative effects of climate change at a much greater rate than the general population. And an example that I can give of this is just looking at my work in New York City with Indo-Caribbean women and gender expansive people. Last fall, we had a terrible rainstorm that was the result of Hurricane Ida. It caused flash flooding. I remember there was flooding on the roads, people couldn't drive. And New York City just feels like it's becoming more and more vulnerable to this. But thinking about who's the most impacted, a lot of the women in my community who have just come from Guyana and Trinidad are actually still trying to find their ground. They're still trying to find their way in navigating a really large city. Many of them don't have the supports. Their family is still back home. They're often excluded workers, they're domestic workers, and they're the first that are impacted when a crisis hits, like COVID, right? They were the first to lose their jobs. And sometimes the only apartments that they can afford are actually basement apartments that are rented out by homeowners, many times immigrant homeowners. And a lot of these women, their apartments were flooded to the point where some people even lost their lives. So that's just one example for me when I think about the way climate justice intersects with gender justice. It's just thinking, who are the people that are most deeply impacted by these issues that we have to think about when we do this work. So I just wanted to spotlight that because I think it's important. And I also want to share that according to the Women's Environmental and Development Organization, a global women's advocacy group, gender justice at the intersection of climate justice is about investing in women's grassroots leadership, right? It's about lifting locally led solutions to the climate crisis. It also means that we're thinking about the fact that those who are most marginalized are often the ones who have the solutions. And so we should always make sure that we're including them in the conversation too. And what I'm really excited about is everyone who's sitting on this panel who is really embodying the idea of sustainability and how to practice that in many different ways. So I wanna share what this conversation is about. It's gonna focus on best practices and challenges facing Hindu communities, and it's going to feature their voices and what they're doing within their respective traditions, organizations. And we're hoping that we inspire you today to think about your own practice of how you are going to do this work to address climate injustice, right? So I want to introduce all of the speakers. Dr. Siva Subramanian is chief of the Department of Neonatology. He's a professor of pediatrics and obstetrics and gynecology at Georgetown University Hospital. He's a co-founder of the Sri Shiva Vishnu Temple in 1976, a founder of the Council of Hindu Temples of Northern America in 1984, and a co-founder of the Hindu American Community Service Incorporation in 2009. Mamta Bishnoi is the founder of the Kharji Foundation. She serves on the Faith for Earth counselors at the UN Environmental Program. She's in the legal profession, and she's also a member of the Bishnoi community, where environmental conservation is a way of life. Anuttama currently serves as ISKCON's International Director of Communications and is on the board of the Bhakti Vedanta College in Belgium, a founding member of Children of Krishna and the Grahasta Vision Team. He is active in several interfaith initiatives in DC, including the Religion and Communicators Council. Under his direction, the Communications Office founded the annual Vaishnava Christian Dialogue and Vaishnava Muslim Dialogue, as well as the North America's Festival of Inspiration. We also have Vijay Ramjattan, who I hope is going to be joining us soon. And when he joins, I will introduce him. But I want to just start by passing it off to these folks to just speak to the work that they're doing. So I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Shiva first.
Namaste. Thank you, Simone, for that introduction. And I also would like to thank Bhumi Global and Sri Gopal and Murali for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Thank you. And what they have started in the Global Summit is so critical. It's so critical, more than anything else that everybody else is doing, because of that. It talks about preserving, what we should environmentally, the conservation principles, and as well as making sure the biodiversity is protected and preserved, and then ecologically sustainable, society could exist. So this is very important, and I'm glad to be part of it, as well. The two keynote speakers, Iyad and Satya, did a phenomenal job in terms of, putting out where we are, what's going to happen. In fact, when I heard that number 1 million species may disappear within years, it is just shocking, in terms of it and what many sectors have to do, whether it is the government or the international bodies, or in terms of local organization, NGOs, individuals. But also there is a place for the spiritual religious organizations in the world. As they also mentioned, 93 religious organizations participated in a conversation recently, and they all speak about the same thing. Every religion speaks about in terms of the preservation and how to take care of the climate crisis. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about in terms of the specific areas how Hinduism is actually part and parcel of this preservation, protecting all the different factors. In its core philosophy, I'm just going to mention for a few minutes about that part of it before I go on to what Siva Vishnu Temple as one temple organization that which does so far and still needs to do, is Hinduism in its core philosophy has the concept of Brahman, the God, Atman, the self, and then the two principles, karma and dharma. And most people know about karma, and I speak about this even in my medical school to the medical students and nursing students about all the different Hinduism 101. And so it's not enough time for this, but just quickly to mention, most of you would have heard about that, but I'll come back to Dharma for a second later on. And the part about moksha, we'll leave it at this point, to the individuals. There's also the second concept in terms of there are in Hinduism many, many, many gods, but it's actually, when you go back to the core of Hinduism, it says both the creator and the created, which is everything in the cosmos, not just the humans, everything in the cosmos are one and the same. And so, if anything, Hinduism will say there is not one God, there is only God. And this God is imbued in everything, pervades in everything, animate and inanimate, all species here and in the cosmos. So that's a very important point. Because there is only God in all species, and both living and non-living, it is our duty to protect all the things that will affect. And as Satyajee also mentioned, it is very, very critical that we consider this concept of Vasudeva Kudumbakam. All the that are here in this universe are family, not just of humans, but everybody. And in the Hinduism, planet Earth is considered as a goddess, Devi, and mother. And so it is the duty of everyone to protect the mother Earth, in this situation, and treat with respect and reverence, which, as you know and I know, is not being done. It is something as a major issue, and everybody has to address that. And if we can incorporate the godliness in terms of the planet and the species that are around us, and so, it was mentioned in the keynote that all the species are not here to serve the humans. We are all here, to cohabitate. And that's what the Hinduism says from the very beginning, in terms of it. The Hinduism also talks about 5 elements, great elements, Panchamaha Bhuta, 5 great elements. These are, as all you know, space, air, fire, water, and earth. They're all the foundations of the interconnected web of life. I think this is something why the Upanishads also declare Brahman, from Brahman arises all these 5 elements, and eventually that is part of the 5 elements are part of the body. I can for sure tell you as a physician that it is. And so these are important part of the nature, and that we have to look at in terms of the welfare of all beings, sarva bhuta hita, all beings, that we have to make sure protect. I just want to repeat something Satyajee said, which I think is important, without which I don't think any of this global summit will go, particularly from the Hinduism, in the Ishavasya Upanishad, where it was said, Ishavasyam idham sarvam yatkinchid jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjita ma gradaha kasyavit dhanam. What it is Ishavasyam idham sarvam. What is all you see here in this cosmos is God. And whatever that is there, you can enjoy, but responsibly. Don't be greedy, and make sure you share. It's a way of paraphrasing that. So it's very important. So when I mention about dharma, it can be defined many ways in the Sanskrit word, many terms. Dhru means to protect or support or uphold. Also, it's a duty, is also mentioned. So it is dharma, to the duty of all of us to protect the environment and what is causing in terms of the climate and in terms of the biodiversity that we talked about. One of the major principles of Hinduism is ahimsa, non-violence. And so this is something and Jainism as well. And so it is very important to make sure that we don't kill each other, whether it's animals or humans or, and as little as possible in terms of plants also have lives minimally and continue to expand the species as well. This is a very quick, run of what Hinduism says about commitment to the environment and climate. And now I'm just going to mention a couple of things about the places of worship and what they can do. We have made an attempt over the years. When we started, we were not focused on this. We weren't focused on devotee services. And then as we started expanding that, it was very clear that we need to apply what is in the theology and philosophy of Hinduism to the practical things that we do, which we didn't do, and which we see Siva Temple, thanks to the board of directors and the devotees and the volunteers that have started doing it. We still have to go a long way, but let me mention a few things. First and foremost is teaching to the devotees and volunteers about this Hindu philosophy, what it says about all the environment and climate and the biodiversity and all those things, so that they, including the children who grow up, understand this very clearly. So the teaching of this is very, very important. And in terms of specifics of Siva Vishnoi Temple, the goal that was made, actually the younger generation is the one that started this, is to reduce the use of plastics. I mean, we do it left and right, without understanding fully. So SSVT has made an effort to have started, still has to go some way, some more, to reduce the use of plastics and use more recyclable and environmentally friendly, biodegradable containers for giving prasad or the food distribution that we all do in a biodegradable containers, so it doesn't add. And also we use plantain leaves, which are traditionally has been used for thousands of years to eat food out of that. And that is something that is biodegradable. But we are making more to eliminate the use of these plastics and styrofoams and all those things. We still have to go some ways, but we started. Reducing the use of plastic water bottles. So we use coolers. We installed coolers, and then we gave, again, biodegradable cups instead of the plastic cups, and as well as in terms of trying to use as many ways of making sure the devotees and volunteers not alone use them, but also get that so they can go back and do it personally as well at home. The other thing that we may not fully understand, is how it impacts is we have optimized the IT system in terms of we have been sending, we have 20,000 plus devotee base, and we send newsletters and flyers and everything for all this. It's all paper, So what we've done over the last 5 years is through the IT system, we do it almost everything on the internet. So we send it to the emails, and so that we don't have to print that many copies of the flyers and newsletters. And I think it's indirect. People don't understand that fully, but I think it is something most organizations, not just religious organizations, can do. And including, I think, United States government says there is even an act to reduce the use of papers in all the different regulations that come. And so this is something very simple that we can do. Recently, we changed all the lights in the temple. I mean, the temple is a huge temple, in North America. And we changed all the bulbs to the LED bulbs. It's not only brighter, but uses less consumption. And I think it is something that people should look at and consider that as well. We are also replacing the old HVAC system that we had. And so this uses more, in terms of less of electricity and more use of natural gas. And we are also now considering putting solar panel to be able to make sure we come off the dependence on electricity, but use more and more of this. And I think this is something that we can also look at. We are combining with Bhumi Global, as partners, in terms of to learn and share, what we know. And please, Simone, let me know if I'm hitting the time limit, please, and energy. And also SSVT has now planted many shrubs, plants, and trees. This is to the CO carbon dioxide emission part to neutralize, in terms of what is done, and to do this. And I think we have also preserved most of the trees and a pond. And I think there is a small rivulet, that goes in the back of the temple grounds. And so we are trying to make sure we encourage the children to see how this is important. And so these are again within the time limit, just some of the things that Siva Vishnoi Temple as an organization attempts to do to contribute its part to, in terms of reducing what it can cause, what it could have caused in terms of the environmental damage. and also by teaching to make sure that the principle is followed by the devotees and volunteers individually as well. Thank you for my time. Pardon me if I have taken more. Appreciate it. Namaste.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Mamta now.
Thank you, Simone, for having me. Navan Pranam to everyone. I'll start my saying with the verses of my Guru. Neeli suki tode nahi, karo karar didhavo mato, pasu pankheru jeev mat hato, rakho man daya ko bhav, kada kharo na mete sa. You give me promise that you will not kill animals and birds. Don't cut green trees. And in your mind, you will have compassion for living beings. If you have ill will in your mind, then God will not remove all your difficulties. These are some of the words. These are just one word you can say, which we have from our Guru Jamboji. I belong from a community. It's called Bishnoi community. It's a part of a Hindu community in India. So Bishnoi community is a Hindu community which is founded by Shri Guru Jambeshwar Maharaj at Samrathal Dhura Mukam, Rajasthan in 15th century. We recently celebrated our 530th foundation year. So today we are gathered here to talk about climate change, and I can say that I always feel proud to say that I came from a Bishnoi community, which is among the world's oldest surviving ecological community. The basis of Bishnoi community is conservation of life. It's like flora, fauna, and avifauna. It is one of the oldest known community globally, which has been working for environmental conservation by embedding this philosophy in its religious and cultural heritage. Guru Jambeshwar Maharaj, who we also believe avatar of Lord Vishnu, gave us 29 rules and Shabdvani of 120 words, in which essence of how to live with the harmony of nature, with community, with other people, with yourself. What are the practices you should adopt to live a healthy life mentally and physically? And many more life lessons is there. And that he gave us 6 centuries ago, which we are talking nowadays through the climate change and other stuff. So at the era of Guru Jamboji, geographical conditions were not that good. So drought is there. People were started migrating from one place to another for the search of food and water. Then Guruji themselves opened their store, because he belongs from a very rich family, but he is sent and avatar of Vishnu. So he told those people that don't migrate. I'm giving you food and water for your living, but you have to start digging ponds, so that when next rainy season came, water can get started stored. And after that, he asked them to plant khejdi tree. Khejdi tree is a very prosperous tree for us, because it is a tree which feed human, animal, air, and soil. And in Rajasthan, where water is, we have a sort of shortcoming of water, so it needs less water. So this is how Bishnoi community started rainwater harvesting, planting trees, and these are there are many documents available which shows how Guruji stopped animal hunting at that time, like 6 centuries ago. From there, Bishnoi community become environment steward with the guidance of Guru Jamboji. So the first incident in our history, what we say, sacrificing their life towards environment, you can only find in Bishnoi community, which is started. The first incident of sacrificing life to protect trees happened in 1604. In the year of 1604, by 2 Bishnoi women, Karma and Gora. So they sacrificed their head to save the tree at that time. After that, in 1730, in Khejdi village, which is situated in Rajasthan, 363 Bishnoi women, men and children sacrificed their lives trying to protect hundreds of trees. After that incident, that current king announced that not a single tree will cut where a single Bishnoi even lived. From 1600 to till date, Bishnois give their lives selflessly to save environment and animal in every field of nature, like water harvesting, conservation, forestry, you name it, wildlife protection, compensation toward animals, saving the trees, protecting free moving area for wildlife from industry and illegal positioning. You just name it, that this is the crisis of environment. You found a Bishnoi working on that from generation to generation. So this is what we are, what Bishnoi community, a Hindu community, which is, you can say, living the life in a way, and we need today and in our for our future generation to live. So recently, we got verdict from NGT, National Green Tribunal, that some of, in the name of development, some industry get cut down around 250 trees. So now we won the fight within a 3 to 4 months, and the company was punished with the fine, and they also asked, the NGT also asked them to plant 10 times of the trees, which they cut down, because that's the important part. Otherwise, you just cut the tree or hunt the animal and you just give the fine and the scene is over. But no, there is an imposition of 10 time plantation of the tree. So because of the love for the nature, Bishnois always survived the drought of the Thar desert, because we are the community which are starting from in the Rajasthan and now spread over all over the India and all over the world also. So Bishnois always, we have, as I already told, that we have 29 rules. There are 6 rules regarding environment in our religions. First, be kind and compassionate to all living beings. Do not hunt or kill animals. Never cut green trees. Always keep the old and helpless male animals in well-proven shelters, so nobody can cut them for their meat and other stuff. Do not castrate bulls. Always use water, milk, and fuel after due scrutiny, so that no insect are carried with them. Never eat meat of any kind. So these are the rules which are which we following in a daily life. So the environment is a part of our daily life. So environmental conservation is amongst the most crucial concern. That's why we all gathered here and talking about the things. And Hindu community is living in their daily life with the environment, like worshipping a tree, like people, tulsi. This is the part of our daily life. These shows how we are well connected with the nature. And Bishnoi community is totally connected with the nature from last 16-year-olds. So and environmental conservation is one of the fundamental basis ethos embedded in Bishnoi culture. It's part of our daily lives. Organic lifestyle, which every Bishnoi is living, helping in reducing environmental footprint, which we are talking daily life. How we can come over with the environmental footprint. So Bishnois are the set example for everyone who if they want to overcome with the environmental footprint in their daily life, they can follow the life of Bishnoi living, where is in India, where in abroad. We successfully did conservation till date because of the inherent simplicity of our religion doctrine, which are part of our lifestyle. And impact of Bishnoi sect you can easily see in surroundings. They are always in a position to set an example for spreading the value of vegetarianism, ecological regeneration, and compassion toward other beings. And you all people know about the beautiful black buck, right? So Bishnoi community saving black buck long before it was listed under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 of India. They protecting environment before even UNEP is born. Like before any law, people are working towards to saving the environment for their generations, because we Indians having tendency to create assets in the form of land or gold for our generation to generation, and Bishnois are protecting the resources and environment for their generation to consume. So this is the proven, this proves that the need to save nature does not exist from the law, but from an inherent understanding of knowledge that we exist because of nature and not the other way around. There are a lot of strength and success story we Bishnois have, and I can talk continuously for the 2 to 3 days. We have lots of stories. You just name it, we having, you say ki, how you are reducing plastic, we are doing that. How you are reducing plastic bottles, we using in festivals like uh, तांबा के जो utensils आते, we are using those utensils continuously. People are even the people who are retired from the services, now they are totally devoted themselves to environment, whether planting nursery or planting trees or educating the generation through their teaching and the other kind of things. So but still there is much more that need to be achieved for the good of society, striving to strike a balance between its lifestyle and its environment. In the climate change, if we live a life according to Hindu philosophy, and especially from a Bishnoi community, if people learn, and there are lots of examples where Bishnoi community impacted the coexisting community which living together. Those people saying we are not born in Bishnoi, but by our karma we are Bishnois. So this is the impact Bishnoi's lifestyle having in many people who are right now awarded by their environmental work through president also. They are totally inspired by the way of living of a Bishnoi community. So Bishnoi's community living is a live example for anybody to overcome with this environmental crisis, because Guru Jambuji already told 600 years ago that you need to rainwater harvest, you need to plant trees, and the many more things. So at the end, I just want to say one thing. Hari Kankhadi Hariya Van, Jit Prabhu Priyo Parvesh. God lives in green forest under a green tree, so protect them. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mamta. There's so much that we can learn from the Bishnoi community. I want to now pass it to Anuttama.
Well, first of all, thank you, Simone, and my esteemed fellow panelists here. It's nice to see Siva again, although on screen is not as nice as in real face-to-face, but we're still overcoming this dependency on this media. Even though we live in the same city, right, we still see each other more often. And Mamta, thank you so much for your enthusiastic presentation. What your community is doing is very inspiring. I wasn't that aware of your history, and very inspiring to know that your deep-seated commitment to this there. And Simone, of course, thanks for hosting us, and Gopal for organizing the whole conference. So I just maybe start with a couple reflections on what the opening session that the two esteemed scholars and global leaders on environmental crisis. I think they kind of drew to our attention the idea that as religious communities in general, including the Hindu communities, that we have an opportunity to raise awareness, that awareness is needed to raise awareness globally, whether one is a religious person or not. There's a need to raise awareness, and then there's a need to mobilize action and change. And we see the religious organizations, we do have a moral voice. People do listen to hear, as Mamta was expressing, you know, Guru Maharaj has said this, and people are going to fall in line. And she was explaining, you know, people come to the Shiva Vishnu temple here in Washington, D.C., and they learn by the behaviors and the voice that we carry. So I think we do have this role to be a moral voice, and also to try to mobilize our own people as much as possible. And within, as a member of ISKCON, which is a global Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we have approximately 1,000 communities, temples, and farms around the world, and a very mixed community. A lot of our members are naturally of South Asian descent, but also we have people that are of whatever, wherever they are, Australian descent, European descent, Russian descent, African descent, etc. So we also, I think, very much carry this burden, this responsibility. And within our tradition, it's very clear that as founding principles, so much of what we do is based on our founding principle. We live in a world where the founding principle up till this point in time, at least within the last 100 years or so, for most places, is consume, consume, consume. Happiness means to consume more and more. You drive down the roads. I think in India, this is true today also, many places. Certainly in America, you drive down the roads, it's just, you're bombarded with billboards telling you what you need to buy, what you need to consume, what you need to have, what you need to possess. And in this way, you'll be happy. And they have the prettiest girls, the most handsome guys standing there with the big signs saying you'll be happy. Of course, I've noticed these days, the other half, Shiva's probably seen this, the other half of the signs are the ones for the lawyers. It's amazing phenomenon the last 10 years. Lawyers have billboards all over saying, contact us, we'll help you sue. So why are people, there's so much business suing people that the lawyers are out competing for clients. Because why? Because this type of mentality of a culture really leads to frustration and angerness and bitterness. And of course, we've seen environmental crisis that's there all around the world. So theologically, as Vaishnavas, we understand the world belongs to God. It's not our property. That's the first thing. Just like if I go to someone's home, if I start grabbing all the expensive things in the room and put them in a bag or stepping on them, people think, what are you doing? How can you possibly do this? This isn't your house. This is, Rajiv's house or Mary's house. You shouldn't be doing this. But if people are thinking, as oftentimes our materialistic culture provides this argument for people, the world is not owned by anybody. It's not created by anybody. It wasn't planned by anybody. But as religious people, we know that's not the fact, especially as Vaishnavas, we emphasize this idea, this world belongs to God, belongs to Krishna. It's not our property. We're just passing through. We're here for a very, very short period of time. And I know looking at Shiva, he's not aging one bit, but myself, I can say over the years, time passes very quickly. As a spiritual being, I'm only in this world for a short time, and I'm going to be held responsible for what I do. If people understood that essential principle, I think they'd be very much more careful about how they abuse and misuse the world, understanding that just like this apartment, it's not mine, it's given to me to use for a short period of time. So in the ISKCON, some of the ways that this kind of plays out, I think just looking at some kind of the broader strokes, we have been, since our inception, the tradition goes back hundreds of years to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Bengal, and previous to that, of course, to Lord Krishna's teaching Bhagavad Gita, and previous to that, all the way to the Vedas, etc. But one of the essential things we've done since our founding globally is try to be leaders in promoting vegetarianism around the world. Oftentimes you read so many studies that said that if people were to do one thing alone, a lot of people think I'm recycling, that's enough. Or I'll buy a Tesla, that's enough. Or I cancel my newspaper and I read it online, that's enough. But actually the one primary thing people should do is, as we know as Hindus, is become vegetarian. And for ISKCON, it's a core principle. And in manifesting that and displaying that, we have a chain of about 100 vegetarian restaurants around the world where we're introducing people to vegetarianism and veganism. We've got many, many cookbooks. Our one cookbook called Higher Tastes, millions of copies have been sold. At our temples, we open to the public Sunday feast programs, we call them, and to introduce people to spiritual life and vegetarianism. And our Hare Krishna food relief programs, Food for Life and Hare Krishna Food Relief, have distributed, I'm just looking up as of 2016, 3 billion meals of sanctified foods. We've tried to, and a lot of people, they people that know, they think, how can you be vegetarian? It means you eat carrots and lettuce, and we know that there's a lot more to it. So try to introduce this to people. And pre-COVID numbers, I don't have any recent numbers, but pre-COVID in India alone, ISKCON's programs have been distributing 1.2 million meals of vegetarian sanctified foods to children in the school program in cooperation with the Indian government. Also, we have eco farms around the world. This is something we've emphasized. 3 particular come to mind. There's a Govardhan Eco Village in Maharashtra, approximately 100 acres. They recently were named by the United Nations as an Eco Tourism Award. They were given that award for the work that they're doing in promoting sustainability. Their buildings are all platinum rated buildings. They have about 15,000 guests come every year. It's very much focused on education. And of course, as Mamta was explaining, rainwater harvesting, natural processing of waste and all of that. There's another very large eco community called Krishna Valley. It's the largest in Europe, about 660 acres, and also similarly focusing not just on living off the grid, but teaching others. I think that's an important thing. We change our behavior, and then we have to change the way we impact with others. And then as far as one initiative that I've been heading up, that we just started recently is called the ISKCON Environmental Initiative, and we've established 3 tiers. Shiva talked about some of the things that are going on at the Shiva Vishnu Temple here in Washington, D.C. area. So we've established 3 tiers of our environmental sustainable practices, and we got a lot of experts to help consult with us, including Gopal. And we looked at waste, food, energy, water, and culture. And we established 3 levels by which we can see how can we change our communities, our temples, our schools. And then from there, how can we use that to set an example for individual members? Because I think the most important thing is they talk sometimes, if everybody that went to church and temple and mosque and synagogue, if they were all environmentalists, that in itself would have a tremendous impact on the world. So I think it's so critical that we're examples at our temples, and that we then say to our people, please go ahead and apply this in your own life. It's really essential for all of us. So I think these are some of the ways that ISKCON's tried to have an impact with our teaching about vegetarianism, our eco farms, our environmental initiatives within our communities, and trying to spread out. And I'm just really happy to see that the work that Bhumi Global is doing, and to try to increase more and more awareness within the broader Hindu community, because it absolutely is a core principle for us. I don't know how you can be a Hindu, how you can be a Vaishnava, especially. I'm most familiar with our particular, Sampradaya. You can't be a Vaishnava, a Gaudiya Vaishnava, if you're not an environmentalist. Because if you say the world belongs to God, but then you don't take care of the world, well, what's your respect for God? Then how can you say you love God or you're trying to serve God if you don't take care of God's property? Just like if you come to my house, if I invite you to come to my house, stay for a couple of days, and when you leave, you took everything valuable and you smashed everything while you were there, I would think you're not a very good friend of mine. So I'll end there and hand it back to Simone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it to BJ. Yay, you're here. We know that you're out of the country and that you were having trouble with your Wi-Fi. But yeah, please share about the work that you're doing.
Hi, namaste, Om Shakti to all of you, and thank you, and happy to be here with all of you this evening. Yes, the Wi-Fi is bad. If I cut out, I'll keep talking. So we at the United Madrasi Association realized that, well, we also know that the oceans play a very big role in our worship. We are Shakti worshippers, and even Vaishnavas, and everyone from where I'm from in Trinidad, where I am at right now, the oceans, the rivers play a big role in Hinduism for us. In New York, I realized as we would go to the oceans to do prayer and pujas for Ganga Mata and various deities, we had to step over murtis to get to the water. We had to step over coconuts and threads and needles and products, all puja waste, if you want to call it that. But not even waste, like puja offerings, because our culture and our belief system that was passed down was that the final offering has to be, the final thing for God to accept your puja is to take it to the ocean and throw it in there. And, 40, 50 years of this happening at Cross Bay, Wildlife Sanctuary, Gateway Wildlife Sanctuary in Queens, New York, it piled up in one small area. When you live in a country like Trinidad that has water all around, or in Guyana that has water all around, lots of places, you don't really see the impact. But when you put all these people in one area over 40, 50 years doing this work, over the years, I've seen how detrimental our people, what we have done to the community and how we have destroyed the ecosystem and made a big stain for ourselves in our community. So I figured if we are the ones who are dirtying it, we should be the ones cleaning it. And no more pointing fingers. and say it's their job and it's their job. Because even within the Hindu community, they say, oh no, it's this temple, it's that temple who's doing it. Oh, it's the Vaishnavas, it's the Shaktas, it's the Shaivites, it's this one. No, sorry. We dirty it, we clean it. And someone has to own that responsibility. And at the United Madrasi Association, I had no idea people were cleaning before me or this was going on before. What I felt disgusted to know that my people were doing this. And we are destroying the very thing that we are worshiping, right? So we believe in devotion in motion. And we believe that we should take our religion beyond the walls of a mandir or an ashram and start living the Gita, start living the Ramayana and put it into practice. What we do, we serve God by serving God's creation. One aspect of God's creation is the oceans and the earth, planet Earth, our home. So we go there and with volunteers, and we are a volunteer-based humanitarian organization. And we go in our clothing dressed as when we go to the beach to do the pujas and dirty it. We also go dressed in the garments that we wear and clean it. So the community that sees us dirty is also seeing us trying to help and fix a problem in the community. And this work has been going on since 2017. And what we do is we wait for after the big holidays, so after the Navratris, after the Shivaratris, after all the big holidays when most of the dumping will take place, we'll go and we'll clean everything. And not now, we don't only clean Hindu waste, we clean everybody's. I pick up dead cats. I pick up chickens and goats, and I pick up crosses. I pick up beer bottles, and we pick up everything. We clean the earth, period. That work has been successful. And after a while, I realized how much more can we keep cleaning people just dumping? Where is this coming from? It's a lack of knowledge, a lack of education, and we have to start up the pipeline higher up where it's coming from. So then we created this mission called Our Murtis Are Not Garbage. And what we start telling people is before you bring it to the ocean, throw it there, because again, people's belief is if a murti is cracked, they can't worship it. So what they do? Throw it in the ocean. If this Diwali we have a new Lakshmi lights up. Well, what am I going to do with the plastic one from last year? Oh, let's throw it in the ocean, buy a new one. So this consumerism in our religion has become a problem, huge problem. So there are thousands and thousands of murtis that we have picked up from the ocean and diyas, metal, brass, copper, all sorts of these things. And our mission, what that was called Our Murtis Are Not Garbage, we have three things: no questions asked, confidential, free of charge. We pick it up from you. And that has worked really, really well. And people now, they change religion, they buy the murtis, or whatever reason. They bring crates and crates of the murtis and containers and drop it in my driveway. Now, there are thousands of these murtis in my driveway. And what we do is, now they're not broken. Now we can recycle it. So if someone wants a murti, they call, hey, Vijay, do you have any Ganeshas? Sure, we do. Come over. But then we use that opportunity to educate them and make sure, where are you going to put this Ganesha? Do you have a place for him? Do you know to worship him? Because if they don't know, he'll fall and break, and that's where he's going to end up in the ocean again. So, and especially during the pandemic, and I'll end with this, we saw a big impact because during the pandemic, as where we're located in Queens, New York, there's a lot of Indo-Caribbean families where they have like multiple families in one home. So, and each family has what? An altar, right? So there's 5 Shivas, 10 Krishnas, everyone have all of these murtis, and it's near and dear to them. So when the pandemic happened, a lot of people passed away, families didn't know what to do with all these extra murtis, and they would have ended up into the ocean. They brought them to us. Sadly, what we have been seeing lately is the Sikh community that is very populated in Queens, New York now. Now they're throwing even the books into the ocean. Lots of books, and we notice we see a lot of Guru Nanak's pictures, and then we see crates and crates of their products into the ocean now. So this is what we do. We love what we do, and it's having a great impact. Thanks, Simone.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And I didn't get to introduce you earlier, so I'm just going to share very quickly that Vijay is the founder and president of the United Madrasi Association, a nonprofit committed to bringing unity within the Madrasi diaspora and across other community groups and organizations through the medium of active community participation, volunteerism, and meaningful humanitarian work. Vijay hopes to destigmatize the Shakti worship aspect of Hinduism. We're grateful to have you here. So we have about a little under 20 minutes, and I had a bunch of questions to ask you all. So we're gonna kind of do this at like a lightning round speed, okay? I'm gonna just do two, and you each have a minute to answer it. So my first question is, how does Hindu philosophy guide your practice of sustainability on the individual level and through your work on a community level? And I'm going to pass it back to Vijay, and we'll go backwards this time.
On a personal level, we believe everything and every form on this earth is a creation of God. And we serve that 100%. And the ocean is a form of God. The trees, the fishes. So we see that as a form of God, and we serve. My scriptures teach me that God is here and everywhere, and God is everything. So in that everything is a clean beach. In that everything is no pollution. In that everything is the garbage that has a place also. And in that everything, as my God, is a clean earth that we can all live and have a happy ending one day, so that our next generation coming up will be successful and fruitful in what they're doing. But also too, we'll change the stigmas and the age-old teaching that's been happening. I feel like my scriptures teach us that we should do better at each level when we know better.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Anuttama to answer the same question.
Yeah, and personally, I think for me, I'm sitting here looking out my apartment window at a beautiful forest of trees just outside. And I think that the most important way it's impacted me is to understand that there's meaning for everything. There's such a sense of meaninglessness in the world. And since there is no meaning, then there's no value. And since there's no value, I can mistreat and abuse, at will. And that's leading to a really hellish condition in life. We look at the political controversies that are there, the global controversies, interreligious conflicts, racist, all these different issues come from not seeing that there's meaning. So I think for me personally, just this understanding that actually there's meaning, because everything, as Vijay was saying, is connected to God. It has a divine connection. It changes everything for me. And I think as a community, just the same thing that I think the Hindu communities have an obligation. I think some of the other religious communities are kind of catching up. It's like our history of we're supposed to have dominion is not working. So we need to change that ethic. For us, it's our ethic. You go all the way back. Atato Brahma Jignasa. Our ethic is inquire about spiritual values, live simply, as Shiva, quoted Gandhi speaking about, simple living, right thinking is another ethic that's there. So that as a community, we need to put these into practice and share them with others.
Thank you so much. Mamta?
For me, as on individual level, I just want to say one thing, that we follow without a break our guru's teaching, because they already told us the simplest way to live with the harmony. So don't cut green trees. We are pure vegetarians. We don't do any kind of alcohol or other kind of stuff, smoke and all that. We are living just a life which our guru says to do us, as a simple living and high thinking. And this is the only way to sustain the planet, to reuse, re-establish, and each and everything, consume less and less. Just Anuttama sir told that consume less and less. So these are the teaching which we are practicing daily, way which they gave us, and the generation to the generation pass on. And our work community level, the same, because as in community, we just follow the saying of our gurus through 29 rules and the Shabdvani, which is 120 words of our guru. We just follow those words in every life situations, and that there is a solution for everything, whether it's a humanity, whether it's a environment, or in a life way, in a way of healthy life to living. So we just follow those 120 verses and 29 rules. This is our philosophy.
Thank
The
you.
sustainability.
Shiva?
I think I'm going to be, mention, so without repeating too many of the things that others have already said, as part of, what we believe in, that we do and use in a personal life. Most importantly is I go back to what Anuttama ji said in terms of, and as well as Mamta ji said, in terms of vegetarianism. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. That comes from the ahimsa. It also, then you don't kill, you don't cause harm to others, as well as you do it personally. It just so happens I'm blessed with, 3 children, and whose spouses, before they were using non-vegetarian food, have now changed completely. And I have now 5 grandchildren, all into that as well. So that, I think, is a core principle that has to be promoted, both in personal life and this. Also, all the other things that I said, we should apply individually, reducing plastic use, reducing, in terms of processed food and all that. At the community level, I am part of another organization called All India Movement for Seva. And we have about 100 plus chatralayas in India, where we support poor, rural and tribal children from education part. We have been doing it from 2000. And one of the things we have done in the last 5 years is to teach them about environment, organic gardening, climate crisis. So start from the young in the school, teach them about all these things. And that is something that we need to do more of.
Thank you. Okay, my last question is, what is your call to action to the larger Hindu community in the US and around the world? Why should they care about this issue? And I'll pass it to Vijay to close us out with that.
Thank you, Simone. And I will say my call to the wider population is stop thinking that you have to get external things to pray to God. You are God. Look at that inner you, and you become the offering one day. That you will not need a banana anymore, so you have to waste that. You will not need the murtis anymore to have, to throw it in the ocean anymore. My call to action is to stop this consumerism in Hinduism, and stop this spending of money and thinking you have to bargain and buy all these thousands of dollars in items just to pray to God, and just you become the offering to God and surrender to that. I think that is pure, is divine, and ultimately that's all you have, just you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anuttama, what's your call to action?
You jumped me in the queue. I was thinking you're going to bounce around more. I was trying to get some thoughts on that. I think the main thing is integrity. And first of all, deeper study of the tradition. There's such a tendency, I have friends of different religious faiths, and, sometimes you go to a Christian church and you wonder, are they hearing what the message is here? And you go to Hindu temples and you look around and everybody's dressed up really nice for Diwali, this or that. But it's like, well, what happens when you leave the room? As your life change? We hear often, and maybe Shiva mentioned, sometimes Hinduism is a way of life. I would say it's not a way. When we say it's a way of life, it's not just it's not just a religion. It is religion, but it's religion that should impact your life. I think that's the real meaning of that. So I think that's the first thing that we have to be able to share that message, and it's a call to action that if we believe there's a spiritual identity, if we believe there's a divinity, if we believe that this world is a manifestation of that divinity, then we have to change the way we live. We can't just, we can't think that we are transcending the world because we think we're transcending the world. We have to have different values that guide us. So I think the call to action, I really like what Vijay was saying about, get out and do something, change your lifestyle in accordance with your teachings, according with your culture, according to your guru, and really put into practice, and don't just rubber stamp. There's too many religions in the world that think because I have this label, that's all I have to do, whether it's Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, Jew, whatever. I have this label there, therefore everything's right. No, I have this label, therefore I have to do everything right. I'm a Hindu, therefore I have to do what Hindus are supposed to do. Not that I just declare I'm a Hindu and automatically everything is just taken care of and doesn't call to action. To say you're Hindu means there is a call to action. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Mamta?
We recently on 9th of September actually released call for action from Bishnoi community. This action is based on the ideas and response we got from the Bishnoi community from past 1.5 year we are working after FSC program. So our call for action, I want to say from all the Bishnoi community people, is to rekindle, reaffirm and re-establish harmony with nature, develop and encourage local and indigenous knowledge based eco practice in and around places of worship, with the aim of building temples as sustainability centers. Because when people came to the temple, whatever they see, they practice in their daily life. So this is the main important. Prioritize advocacy campaign and action on environment pollution through Bishnoi's philosophy and principle, and show and grow empathy, support, trust, and compassion towards other religious and non-religious actors on environmental conservation and activism, with promote, collaborate, and partners on SDGs. These are some of our call for action from the Bishnoi community. We just released on 9th of September. So we want to call everyone to for the hand holding and partnership to spread the knowledge we have around the world to live a life in a sustainability way.
Beautiful, thank you. Please share that with us when you can. And Shiva? I think you're muted. Okay, it looks like you're having some trouble unmuting. That's okay. So the one thing that
I think it just unmuted. It just kind of got stuck somewhere. And I know Vijay would appreciate this in terms of the Wi-Fi problems and that I have had. My computer crashed this morning, and then using the iPad, to be able to do it. And so I think all religions talk about in terms of what is important to make sure about this environment and the climate, and it is just understanding it and practice what is being preached. I think that's important. The second part of it is we as individuals should work on, when we say the larger community, every area, the places of worship. Anuttama ji mentioned about in each of the places of worship, are they actually getting the message? I think in terms of that, as well as in terms of the local NGOs and the corporations, which I think Tripathi ji mentioned way up in there as a keynote speaker. We have power, quote unquote, as a religious spiritual community. And so the corporations have to listen, which they have started listening. And I think we just to keep the pressure on to be able to make sure, Mamta ji said about not coming and destroying the trees, make sure if you take 10 trees away, plant 100 trees, all of those things are important that we should as individuals not just sit at home, but also work on all these things as well as the local, central governments in every nation, as well as the international organizations. I think that is the only way we can make an effect. We are running fast towards destruction, and I think we just need to make sure. Last point: why should we care? Self-preservation. If nothing else, it's important to preserve you, and in terms of and pass on something that is worth passing on to the children and grandchildren. Keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the wisdom that you all brought today. I feel like I learned so much. And I feel like a central theme that came up in what all of you were saying was this idea of consumerism, and also this idea of just community education. So what does it look like for us to educate our community more, to just understand their carbon footprint? I mean, I don't think this is in the awareness of a lot of our people. And the second point I want to leave us with as we sit through the sessions, the rest of these 2 days, is just what does it mean to also center those who are most vulnerable to climate change, right? And making sure that they're included in whatever work is done to address the issue. Thank you so much, everyone. And I am looking forward to the rest of the summit. I'm going to pass it back to Gopal.
Thank you so much, Simone, for moderating that excellent panel discussion. So many rich points there, and a wonderful cross-section of Hindu voices spanning the globe and from different Sampradayas and traditions and communities. And it's a real blend, which is really highlighting the beautiful diversity and the nuances of what Hinduism has to bring when it comes to caring for Mother Earth. So thank you all for that. We're going to take a short break now for the next 15 minutes or so. We'll be reconvening at 11 o'clock. You can stay logged in to this Zoom session. We'll just put a bumper image on the screen so you can go and get a cup of tea or drink of water or stretch your legs. And we'll be back at 11 o'clock for the next session, which will be focused on the role that faith groups can play in addressing the triple environmental crisis. And that will be an interfaith panel with Hindu speakers, Buddhist speakers, and interfaith leaders. So please come back at the top of the hour at 11 o'clock Eastern time for that. But again, Simone, thank you so much for convening this. Dr. Subramanian, Mamta, Anuttama, Vijay, thank you all so much for your wisdom and your time. See you in 15 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you all for being back with us, and we are very excited for our next discussion today, which is going to be on the role of faiths in addressing the triple planetary crisis. We're very delighted to have a very dear friend to Bhumi Global, Reverend Mark Fowler, as our moderator for this session. So I'll ask Mark to join us, and I'll give him an introduction, and then he can introduce the other speakers. Reverend Mark Fowler is the CEO of the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding, a secular non-profit organization whose mission is to combat religious prejudice, promote justice, and build respect for religious differences. Celebrating 30 years, Tannenbaum raises awareness, builds knowledge, and implements strategies to promote long-term, tangible change and more respectful and inclusive behaviors in institutions and organizations globally. Reverend Fowler is also a graduate of and on the faculty at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York City. So I believe Mark will just be joining us shortly, and I'll ask our other panelists to join as well. I should also mention Mark is an advisor also to Bhumi Global, so we're very grateful for him for that. Mark, great to see you. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I am well, Gopal. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, you are the master. I'll hand it over to you.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much. It really is truly a pleasure to be with you and to be with everyone joining us from around the world. It's my pleasure to serve on the advisory council of Bhumi Global, and so excited to bring this session to everyone. The session is entitled Role of Faith Addressing the Triple Planetary Crisis, Climate, Biodiversity, and Pollution. And our intention during this session is to look at faith-based action on addressing the planetary crisis, and noting that many times those actions have often existed in silos and have sometimes been stunted by interfaith conflict. So we hope in our conversation to explore the ways in which people and organizations can work together to save the planet by drawing from their scriptural wisdom and certainly from all of the important work that is being conducted by our panelists today. So please let me introduce you to and please correct me if I mispronounce your name, because I think that that is an important practice for all of us. Sujani Kandasamy is a doctor, and I should say Dr. Kandasamy is a researcher, intersectional environmentalist, educator, student, parent, sister, and daughter. And as the co-founder and director of education at the Starfish Canada, a charity aiming to engage, empower, and inspire diverse youth voices in environmental solutions, she approaches her work as a community builder and gently walking visitor on the land we call Canada. She believes that it is vital to engage with interdisciplinary voices, build upon diverse ways of thinking, and engage in interfaith and intergenerational leadership to propel thoughtful innovations. And she is also a member of the Bhumi Global's board of directors and is always keen to learn from all those around her. So please help me welcome Sujani. Next, introducing Reverend Susan Hendershot, who has served as president of Interfaith Power and Light since 2018. She was raised in a blue-collar family outside of Cleveland, Ohio, before attending Bethany College in West Virginia, where she graduated with honors with a BA in Religious Studies. Reverend Hendershot went on to graduate school at Emory University in Atlanta, where she received her Master of Divinity degree from the Candler School of Theology, and after graduate school moved to Iowa, where she was ordained in the Christian Church and the Disciples of Christ, and served as a pastor in local congregations focusing on social justice. Reverend Hendershot also led faith-based nonprofit organizations and served as the first Heartland field organizer for the One campaign on global poverty. And just prior to her current role, she served as the executive director at Iowa Interfaith Power and Light, one of the state affiliates in the Interfaith Power and Light network. Excuse me, and Reverend Hendershot believes that climate change is a moral issue, disproportionately impacting those who are most vulnerable in our world, and she gets her motivation and inspiration from her two sons. So welcome, Dr. Hendershot. Steve Chu serves as Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation's representative to the United Nations in alignment with Tzu Chi's work in disaster relief, climate action, education for global citizenship, sustainable development, and gender equality. Steve works to build relationships, share best practices, and develop programs with other organizations to make tangible impacts on the ground, with the mission of alleviating the suffering of those in need. With over 23 years of experience in community-based development and local interfaith partnership, Steve seeks to connect the importance of grassroots action to policies that are being developed on the international level. And finally, last but certainly not least, Dr. Neha Pathak is a chief physician editor at WebMD, where she is responsible for ensuring the accuracy of health information and serves as host of the Health Discovered podcast. She also reports on topics related to lifestyle, climate change, and the environmental impact on health for Medscape, WebMD, and Yale Climate Connection. In addition, Dr. Pathak is an adjunct assistant professor at Emory University School of Medicine and program director for the Veteran Affairs Quality Scholars Fellowship Program at the Atlanta Veterans Affairs Medical Center. She received a certificate in climate change and health communication from the Yale School of Public Health and is also co-founder of Georgia Clinicians for Climate Action and co-chair of the Global Sustainability Committee for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So first, thank you all so much for joining us today, for agreeing to participate in this conversation. Welcome. And I'd like to start our session today, and we can really just keep this conversational, I believe. And I think it's important that we all have the opportunity to kind of define from our own viewpoint, what is this triple planetary crisis? How do you define it? And how are you approaching this conflict or this crisis from your unique lens? And anyone can begin. Steve, are you?
I'm happy to jump in first, yeah, and then we can take it from there. So happy to be with you all. I think it's so interesting, like in terms of thinking about what it means for our planet to be in crisis and for us to have 3 crises that we're facing at the same time, begs the question of beyond just the problems of like climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution, what is really happening, right? Are these the issues that we're facing, or is there an underlying root challenge that kind of manifests these things that are happening and that we call crises, right? So from Tsuji's perspective, we really see this as a degradation and distortion of our relationship to the natural world and our failure to recognize our interdependence with all sentient beings that exist on this planet, and then also the environment that we live in as well. And it's also speaking, I think, as we look at these crises of like pollution and climate change, it's really a question of disposability, right? Like, are we living in this materialistic world where like I can just simply set aside a piece of trash and say, this is no longer my problem. This is for someone else to take care of, and I can dispose of this. And if similarly we're able to do this, are we doing the same to the people who exist in this ecosystem alongside of us, right? Are we interconnected, or are we really living these individualistic lives? So from our perspective, we really see the triple planetary crisis as a crisis of values and a loss of understanding of our interdependence.
Oh, that's amazing, Steve. Thank you so much. Susan, please.
Yeah, well, I think that was very well said. And I also want to express my appreciation for being here today. I'm so excited to be with all of you for this important conversation. I also, and from the perspective of Interfaith Power and Light, we very much see this triple planetary threat as a spiritual and moral issue. And I think, my sense is that so many of us would prefer to, silo our issues so that we can sort of think, oh, well, I'll just deal with this one, right? I'll just deal with climate, or I'll deal with biodiversity. The reality, I think, is that all of these are, in terms of the threat, very interconnected to one another. So in the same way that, pollution is impacting our lives, it is also being driven by the burning of fossil fuels, which is driving climate change. And of course, it is leading also to biodiversity loss, among other things. I think the flip side of that is also true, which is when we address these issues, we can create healing for the planet. So when we lower our emissions that are driving climate change, we are also lowering pollution from the burning of fossil fuels and other things. Increasing biodiversity is also part of the solution. Nature-based solutions are also part of the solution. And by lowering, emissions and pollution, we can help increase biodiversity. So I look at sort of like the threat is very interconnected, and the solutions to that threat are also very interconnected.
Thank you so much, Susan. Neha, please.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. First, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all today. I just love coming to these types of events because I'm always so inspired by everyone I hear speak. So I think I just want to add to what Susan said. As a health professional, I think we often think of health, again, as very siloed. So you go to your cardiologist for your heart problem, your endocrinologist for your diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what health professionals are coming to understand as well is that you can't really silo health. You're either disease managing people, and if you want to manage disease, maybe you can break it up into, well, this is high blood pressure and this is diabetes. And but if you want to promote health, you have to really think about the whole person. And in the same way, we have to think about planetary health rather than just thinking about an issue with climate change or an issue with pollution and environmental degradation. or issue with biodiversity loss. How do all of the concerns for protecting our planet play a role in promoting health for individuals, communities, and really all beings that we share this earth with? So I think that as a mother, as a person of a Hindu tradition, and as a health professional, I can't separate planetary health from individual health, from the health of my family or my community. So I think we really are trying to gain this understanding. And exactly like Susan said, there are threats to us being able to be healthy people on this planet if we are going to, because of biodiversity loss and pollution and climate change, lose access to healthful, nutritious foods, lose access to the ability to sleep a restful night, lose the ability to perform physical activity safely outdoors because of pollution and wildfires and other issues. So I think that really thinking about things from a lifestyle lens allows us to identify threats, but also see the opportunities that if we do move toward a healthy plant-based diet, we are feeding multiple birds with one stone, which I've heard is the better way to say killing, two birds with one stone. So I'm using that metaphor from now on. But I'll stop there, and I thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for that metaphor. Going to be using that going forward. Love that. And Sujani, would you like to get into the conversation?
Definitely. And thank you also. It's a pleasure to be here and to learn from all of you. You all spoke so beautifully, and I can see a lot of the alignment with the way that I think and feel about this issue coming through your words and your expressions as well. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that, really resonate with me and kind of sit with the way that I approach this work as well. And that is that, these three pillars, like when you kind of unroot that, you see this like massive root system underneath that is really the source, as Steve said, to kind of contributing to these pillars being what we visualize as the crises and the challenges that we're dealing with. And I think certainly it has a lot to do with our worldview and our priorities and our values and how we position those in our actions and our practices. So I think, like something even like overconsumption as a way of thinking and kind of living is very much contributing to a lot of these problems that we're witnessing is that need to kind of consume and it's from all aspects of society, including personal behaviors, but also like top down, bottom up kind of approaches. So I think that's a key area that is part of that root system that is contributing heavily to kind of these issues that we see. And one other piece that I wanted to emphasize is that I think with this triple threat and conversations around solutions, this is an opportunity where like science, faith, worldviews, philosophies, there's like widespread intersections and agreement that we as humans are like stewards of the earth and we're caretakers of the earth. I know from many faiths believe that, and certainly I do, and like with the reference to air and water and the key pieces of existence. And I think that's where, like as Neha said, and this resonates with me very much, is that like human identity and existence cannot be is inseparable from nature. And I think that sort of scaffolds the idea that these different worldviews can kind of align on that common ground and move towards like solution building. And of course, it's complicated because there's so many interlinks and interconnectedness that exists within the problems, but also the solutions. And I think that's where the momentum can be driven, and we can work on solutions collaboratively together and be a unit in that force.
Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful words. I mean, so I now have a new question that we didn't discuss before, and it's your own fault. So, but I love this conversation that we're entering into, looking at these symptoms of something larger, that this triple threat is the symptoms of something larger, this intricate root system. I'm always mindful of, the thing that my grandmother was fond of saying, which is that there's really nothing new under the sun. That whole idea that while we might find ourselves dealing with these crises at a fever pitch at the same time, this is not necessarily our first entrance into this particular moment, into this particular dance. So I would just be curious, from each of your perspectives, how do you see this moment as different from other moments where we have certainly identified this incongruous relationship with all of creation, and what's different about it now? Or do you note it as different, and are you responding perhaps differently than you may have responded in the past? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I think Susan unmuted first, so I'm going to give her the space first.
No, I was happy to turn it over to you. I mean, it's such a deep question. And, I will say the first thing, and probably this is just based on because of the work that I do, the first thing that comes into my head about why this is different is because of the very large divisions that we see politically, at least here in the United States, but I know also in other places in the world. And it's a question in my mind, and it goes back to the earlier discussion, which is about values. And so thinking about, we often, when we have workshops and conversations with religious leaders, we start at the place of values. What is it that you value? What is it that you care about? And it's, I think without fail, what comes up in that conversation is the value that people place on their children, their grandchildren, their family. There are significant conversations about places in the natural world where they feel most connected to the sacred. It could be a river or a mountain or a large body of water, or their garden, it's their backyard, right? And yet, even though we see that we can actually look out our window and see the devastation that is occurring due to climate change, due to pollution and biodiversity loss, people saying, it's not the same here as it was when I was a child, when I grew up here, so they're feeling very much the losses, and they're feeling very much the fear about what their children or grandchildren's future is going to be. And yet we cannot seem to reach agreement on how to act. And I think it's really significant as we're in this moment, leading up in just over a week to COP27 in Egypt, that we're still not in a place where we, as nations, have met our commitments. There's huge political disagreements within countries about how to do that, whether or not we're going to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and so on. And so, I feel like the political dynamics are one of the major challenges that we're facing right now, even though I feel like on an individual values-based level, we're very much in agreement about the kind of future that we want our children to have. So that's what I would put out as like my sense of what's different now.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Stephen. Or Steve, I should say, not Stephen.
Yeah, I'm loving this reflection from Susan. And I think we're really finding ourselves in a very interesting moment in that there's political divisions, there's rising sentiments of nationalism, a continued disenfranchisement of vulnerable populations, and we're seeing those things on the rise, right? Simultaneously, we're also recognizing that there is either a consolidation or abdication of power within communities and societies, and it's really becoming more and more tense, right? So we see this as part of our societal backdrop. Simultaneously, I think one thing that I'm consistently reminded of working within the climate space, especially with indigenous communities, is what we constitute as a crisis, and like this moment where we're planting or pointing to the triple planetary crisis has been something that they've been saying for hundreds of years, right? So it's not like the challenges that we're facing right now just appeared out of nowhere, but rather it's really been the slow burn of our ignorance to the consequences or karma of our actions, right? And so we planted these seeds hundreds of years ago, and so right now we are reaping the fruits of our labor, right? But with that said, I think what has been really energizing, what has been really exciting is we're seeing this mass awakening, right? Whereas I think generations ago, our connections to the natural world, our understanding of how consumerism and consumption can become unchecked and lead us to overconsumption, driving these problematic behaviors was a little more muted, right? Because it was the glory days of consumption, right? Like everything you buy comes in cute packaging. You were like, yay, where does this go? I don't know, but the landfill's not that tall. So like we can deal with this, right? And then we scale, and here we are. But I think the seeds that we're planting right now are very much going to lead us to that better future. Whether or not we're around to see that future, I think is really a question of collective will and our ability to really rally. But I really have faith in humanity and our ability to come together in dire moments. And with that in mind, I think it's really this question of like, what have we learned coming out of the pandemic that has like changed the way we interact with each other, right? Did we as collective societies use the pandemic as a moment to isolate each other further away from each other? Or did we really see this as an opportunity to fully experience mutual aid, communityness, and like our deep interconnectedness with each other from the international community?
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Neha, I see that you've unmuted, please.
I love going third because I feel like all of the major thoughts have already been said, and then I can just sort of play with some of the threads. So many threads. So I think I totally and completely agree with this whole concept that there's nothing new under the sun and that these are cyclical challenges in some way. It's interesting with COVID, we have shifted back to a multi-generational household in my home. So where we had been sort of very much just the 4 or the 5 of us, we had a baby during COVID, which brought a grandparent who's 86 years old and who's that bridge to sort of this old, to a time when things had moved so slowly. And now you recognize that over the 70 years of his lifespan, I mean, he's 86 now, but like since he left the homeland, how rapidly things have changed. The accumulation of these pollutants, these chemicals that we've just put out into the world, how that happened so quickly. So I think one thought that comes to mind just from conversations with him is proportionality, and that in the cycle of time, there are these shifts in proportion for when people recognize there's an issue. And when you have a growing proportion of the population understanding and seeing in their face that this is a problem, I think that shifts things. As a healthcare person, I often see, like, you can see someone getting sick, and you can point it out to them, but it's really something happens in the language, something happens in their ability to understand and accept it, and the mindset shift that happens that then finally allows for the behavior change. So I feel like there is a shift in proportionality for the people who, as Steve said, there have been populations that have been exposed to high levels of pollution, the grief of biodiversity loss, of losing their sacred lands for hundreds of years. And now more of us are seeing it. And so I think that allows for a mindset change that is leading to behavior change for things that just within the 20 years that I have been like more of a sentient person. I'm older than that, but I won't cop to how much older. But just recognizing how people are changing their behaviors in terms of what they want to eat, the respect toward nature, and understanding coming out of COVID how important having access to natural spaces is for their own personal health and for their communities. So I'll stop there, but those are some of the shifts I think we're seeing in this cycle.
Great, thank you so much, Neha. Sujani, please.
Yes, just to add, and great conversations, and it's so powerful to listen. And I love being part of these conversations too, because every time you participate, you learn new things and you add new things to your toolbox. I think so much for so long has been like out of sight, out of mind. And I think a lot of these challenges are sometimes characterized like that, just depending on which side of the coin people are looking at things. And more, as everybody has said, we've been seeing through empathy-driven dialogues, through other approaches, we've been witnessing the challenges faced by others that are not ourselves. And that sort of also bridges the need to contribute to the solution and no longer be silent as part of the problem. And a lot of things, like a lot of components of measuring environmental change, it has an element of out of sight, out of mind piece to it, because people may not be able to conceptualize the volume of things, or emissions are not always easily conceptualized, right? What does that volume actually mean? Where it's not like you're looking at a ton of plastic straws, for example. So there's certain things that do have a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind piece to it. And the more that we can unpack that and illustrate what that means, I think can change behaviors and can at least bring everyone closer to being on the same page about things.
Thank you so much for that. I want to kind of use this moment then to pivot a little bit and ask each of you if you can speak to either efforts you have engaged in or directly witnessed with faith-based communities from an interfaith perspective, and how those efforts are going. How are they addressing this crisis? And then just, maybe using as a foundation some of the things that we've already talked about, that intricate root system and how is that functioning, and the whole, I love proportionality, moderation, and even in moderation, but really bearing in mind how does fear play out in all of this? Because Susan, I think one of the points I really appreciated about that you made is this whole idea of what's mine and my values about my family, my children, my grandchildren. And does that ever get to a larger perspective where it's not just mine, but it's ours? So would love to hear anyone speak about that. I'm just going to start hitting the roulette wheel and just.
I know, I'm happy to jump in. I just didn't want to always be the, person in the room who
we're kind of counting on you for that now, Susan. If you don't start, then Steve doesn't feel like he can go.
I want to just comment really super quickly on what Sujani said about about people, just the idea that people are living their lives, right? I heard a climate communicator recently who said the majority of the people in the world are not climate deniers; they're just living their lives, right? So it's more the idea that we have to engage them from a place where they already are. And oftentimes that is, their families, their community, what's happening in a place that they can see versus what's happening on, at COP27 in Egypt, which feels really disconnected for a lot of folks. In our work with IPL, we do a great deal of climate advocacy here in the U.S. And it is very much from an interfaith perspective. So we engage with other religious groups who are active on advocacy from all different spiritual traditions. And we try as much as possible to coordinate and collaborate on our advocacy efforts. I think one of the challenges that we recognize is that, not every religious tradition speaks the same language. However, I think it's really important to remember that all major religious traditions that I am aware of talk about in some way, shape, or form a sacred duty to care for those who are vulnerable and to care for our earth. And I think that this actually is a way, it's something that we can align ourselves together on and actively work together on. And I think that the diversity of voices and the diversity of the ways that we speak about this, instead of being something that divides us, is in fact a strength that we bring, because we can speak to a wide variety of people and identify who the best messenger is, right? And what's the best language? Who is the best messenger? So for me, I think that, our major interfaith engagement has certainly been on federal policy advocacy here in the U.S., and then our state affiliates who are working on policy advocacy at the local and the state and the state levels. And we have 40 of those around the U.S., including, I know Neha is involved with our Georgia affiliate, and they're doing amazing work there. So I look at that as very much a strength, even though there certainly are challenges in working in the interfaith space. I think the diversity of our voices actually brings a wealth of knowledge and strength and understanding to this work.
Thanks so much, Susan.
I don't want to step on Steve. Steve, do you feel that?
No, we're changing it up.
We're mixing it up. Yeah, I so appreciate that. And I think that one of the things I think about is identity. And I think that when we come at it from an interfaith lens, we get to use this piece of identity that, like Susan said, is really something that's beyond our individual selves and really is a piece of us that is really yearning to create community and reach out to others. And so that feels to me like a very strong way to do this work, where you can help people create so one of the things in behavior change that we always say is when someone's trying to quit smoking, let's say, and they say, I'm trying to quit smoking, you know that they've actually shifted and they're going to be more successful when they say, I am a non-smoker. So there's something very powerful in the way that we describe ourselves. So when you identify with a community of people that hold the earth sacred, that want to do this work and connect with others to do this work, you know that you're probably going to have a higher likelihood of change and someone who's going to engage in those types of behaviors. I think being part of the interfaith space has been just eye-opening for me. I think I grew up as a Hindu in the United States, not ever being told to hide that identity or how important that piece was for me, but in a place where it was very hard for people to understand, where I was coming from. What do I mean by this karmic relationship with the earth? What do I mean by seeing the river as a goddess? And really at home, that's what, anytime we passed a river, we would move that sacred geography of India to New Jersey, to Georgia, so we pass a river and we'd say, Jay Ma Chattahoochee. Like, it's just something that we've grown up doing, and being in the interfaith space and seeing how people are doing that in their communities has really allowed me to work more within Hindu spaces to just sort of share that and to work together with other communities. And I mean, we are a very festival-based people here in Georgia. We love our Diwali celebrations and our, whatever, what have you, but being able to learn from other congregations and see, well, this is the way that they're greening their religious practices. How do we green our festivals? So a very small example, but I think just seeing how that's working in other communities and trying to translate that to our own has been a way of using identity, using whatever heritage we hope to continue for our children, and trying to tie that with each other.
The phone gonna work?
So I guess I'll continue and we'll push Steve as the last speaker to this collaboratively. But yes, it's so much reflection here. But I think for me, I've always sort of imagined and visualized like one way of thinking is like a thread. But then when you've got multiple ways of thinking, you're like braiding together and interweaving those many threads to strengthen the conversation, to strengthen the impact. And that's kind of like the first thing that I think of, that my brain navigates to when I think of like interfaith, bringing together different worldviews and different philosophies for a common good. And there's widespread agreement through that braid too on what the direction is and such, and not to minimize the challenges. Like it's hard work to do this work. But I think there's so much opportunity to learn and grow along the way as you're braiding that together, and more fruitful outcome in the end, because there's like shared learning, as Neha put so beautifully with the identity pieces, and shared learning often leads to shared change and shared commitment to that change. So I just wanted to bring that kind of visual in, because that makes a lot of sense to me. And some of the work that we've done, like around like two-eyed seeing approaches to climate change, and kind of interweaving like, like even indigenous worldviews with like Western approaches to understanding climate change, and like interweaving those together to produce like educational workshops and opportunities for young people to learn about how that interweaving process happens. And I think that's also a great opportunity, is to involve young people and youth and students in that way of thinking, because it really is like a shift in thinking to be able to promote and advocate for that interweaving process. And so much of our education has lacked that piece. And so certainly bringing that back into the conversation in many ways, and encouraging it and building upon the strengths of that, I think is the way forward.
These are all such beautiful reflections. I think in adding on top of this and building on top of these thoughts, the first thing that comes to mind for me in terms of why interfaith collaboration is so exciting, right, is I think we find ourselves in a moment as a whole society that is asking this question of like, how can we solve these crises? The material world does not offer us the solutions alone, right? And so people are really yearning for more, and that immaterial, that spiritual level of like how we interrelate, it's missing in a lot of traditional discourse. And so a lot of entities are turning to different faith-based organizations and asking that question of like, we haven't traditionally included you in these conversations. What do you have to bring to the table, right? And in asking that question, we can either play two routes, right? We either say, I feast at the table alone, this is my space, I claim this, right? Or we can adhere to our values of really fraternity and interrelationship and recognize that, like, as one faith tradition alone, we do not have all the answers, and we might not even speak their language, right? We might not be culturally related to them in any way, shape, and form. So to do the work, whether it's advocacy, direct action, education, all of these things in an interfaith manner, allow for us to amplify and touch people's hearts in ways that we alone as a Buddhist humanitarian aid group could not do by ourselves, right? So I think interfaith engagement is woven into the DNA of how we walk and do our work. And so I want to lift up three things. The first being, in terms of youth involvement, like Sujani was saying earlier, like, it's such a great opportunity. And I think it comes at a very interesting moment, right? Where a lot of youth have been hurt by religious institutions and deeply wounded in ways that either force them out of these religious communities entirely, or they themselves have left because of ideological differences, or there's a mismatch of like faith and science, right? So I think as faith-based organizations who are trying to work with youth, one of the things that we've been very intentional about is how do we ensure that as we work to empower these youth, we are providing them the right education, right? To empower them in ways that they don't feel like they are being oppressed and extracted upon, but rather that they are being empowered and have new tools to add to the richness of what they already have, right? The second thing within the plastic space that Suji really loves doing is to model and create space for people to become activated and care about these issues, right? It's one thing to talk about like, oh, you should recycle your plastic at home because like you generate like 5 pounds of like plastic waste over like a month, right? Or however much we want to generate. Like you see that number, you see that like waste, and you're like, but that's just like me, right? But it's another thing to go to a recycling center that Suji has built, where you see the mountains on mountains of plastic waste and like volunteers hand cleaning each plastic bottle so that it can actually be recycled, right? And then to be taught that if these bottles aren't cleaned, that once they're recycled, they'll still end up in the landfill, right? And to have that like physical imagery there, and to say, because oftentimes we have a lot of people within our communities who say like, I care about climate change, right? And it's one thing to care about it, but like it's another thing to witness the devastation and destruction that is happening within coastal communities around the world, right? And to like firsthand experience these things and to create those opportunities for people to become activated, and then give them actions that they can take within their community on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, gives them a lens of hope rather than despair. Right. I think coming back to youth, like youth are very overwhelmed these days because we get so much information, but there feels like there's so little we can do. Right. So as religious, spiritual, and faith organizations, it's part of our responsibility to help our communities heal, right? And what better way to heal than to model these actions? The other thing I'll lift up is within the advocacy space, whether it's within our work with food systems transformation linked to climate resilience, or biodiversity loss, and how we as faith voices are lifting up our voices. In the global and local spaces that we operate in, we really do find deep resonance coming together as different faith traditions and asking the question, what unifies us? Right? Because I think in both this thread of conversation and the earlier conversation we were having about like our interpretations of what a triple planetary crisis is, we talk about silos, right? And silos are advantageous to the continuation and perpetuation of the status quo. Right? The more we keep siloing ourselves in the guise of, I want to be an expert in this space and dedicate all my energy and focus into this one thing without acknowledging how interdependent all of these issues are, we fail to support each other to achieve victories that will forward our own work, right? And in that failure to really build these interconnected victories and intersectional allyships, we put ourselves at a disadvantage, right? And so both as faith-based organizations working together and finding where we are unified as religious institutions, but then also bringing in secular organizations that are doing this advocacy as well with us and saying like, you may not traditionally work with us, but through finding our common ground, this is something we can unite together and build that sort of coalition to create the actions we want to see.
Thank you all so much for this rich conversation. I think at this point, I'd love to ask each of you to just share one anecdote that really continues to inspire you, despite whatever the challenges may be, all of the ways in which we know that there is more work to do, but what's that thing that happened or that meeting that you were at that was kind of like the thing you always kind of go back to when in those moments where it does not seem like we're making the kind of progress that's necessary? And would love to hear from each of you about that, particularly from an interfaith lens. Everybody's got their hand off the wheel now. So that means I'm
happy to start.
I was
That's
a high
fine.
school
I can
teacher
start
for a long time.
I'm just like, I don't want to always start. And so I'm like very conscious that like in this panel, I don't want to always jump in, but I'm happy to start with this one and then hold space for everyone to also do some reflection as well. I think my anecdote that I think of a lot is the disappearance of fireflies. And so when I was younger, to spend time in the evenings in Ohio, there's like that richness of like the evening dew, and then like as the sun sets, you begin to see fireflies, right? And these fireflies will like one will start lighting up, and then you'll see more appear and emerge. And as I grew older, I began witnessing like the reduction of fireflies within like my backyard and like my surrounding community, and I really felt environmental loss, right? But then recently, our founder, Dharma Master Zen Yen, has been speaking about the metaphors of fireflies in a way that has like reawakened my appreciation of fireflies. But rather than seeing it as like a loss of like, oh, like because of pollution, because of climate change, like this beautiful thing that I once had a relationship with is at risk, and I'm like losing this, right? That used to be like the pain point, right? But for my new perspective on this has been like there's such a joy to witnessing fireflies coalesce and come together, right? Where in the pitch black of night, when you look across the evening sky and you see nothing, perhaps stars above, but nothing in like the forest around you, and you see that first firefly light up its bulb, and there's like that little spark of hope, right? And then from there, you see more fireflies dancing like throughout the like landscape, and it just like it like twinkles and they all like coalesce together, and you realize like you're not alone in this struggle, and you're not like by yourself trying to light up this whole like forest, right? But rather that there are people by your side actively across faith traditions, across communities, trying their best to put their little light into the world as well, right? And so I still have that sense of like sadness where I'm like, there used to be more fireflies, right? But rather than to say like progress could have been better, like there could have been more being done in this moment, that like we're not where we need to be, it's to revel in the joy of the present moment, to witness how hard these beings are trying to like glow and light up this beautiful forest, right? And so similarly, I think looking at this triple planetary crisis, looking at COP27 as we head there in a week, I think there's a lot to despair about, right? Like we're in a very challenging moment. But if we continue to only look at the bad and we don't look around us and see how many beautiful fireflies are already by our side, like little as they may be, right? There could have been more. There could always have been more, but little as they may be, these beings, these people by our side doing this work really inspires hope for me.
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm reminded, I've been thinking a lot in our work at Tannenbaum, some of the work that we do with corporations in particular around religious diversity in the workplace. One of the conversations in kind of DEI circles broadly defined is this idea of, prove to us that this actually makes a difference. And, things haven't really progressed so much since a lot of these efforts were continued. And it really made me begin to think that we don't often talk about how much worse it could have been if these efforts had not been in place. And so I love the metaphor and the analogy to the experience of fireflies and how many do we really see? What does it take tonight to light the night, if you will? Thank you so much for that. Someone else? Before I call on you?
I can go. I think that for me, one of the foundational things that has always helped me keep going before climate change, the climate crisis, the planetary health crises, of all sorts, really made it into my consciousness. Anytime there was struggle, there was this tradition that allowed me to sort of think about the fact that nothing is promised. I mean, that was the one piece of our scripture that my parents would always say to us, that nothing is promised. The only thing you have is to get up in the morning and to do action. Now, you can make that action positive for the world, or you can make it negative for the world, but beyond that, nothing is promised to you. So I think that reflecting on that as I do this type of work with all of you and with so many others, and at the same time having in my home 3 goddesses, my 3 daughters, who really kind of do bring you always to the present moment. So having that, I think the youth in whatever capacity in your life really does show you that, one, you have to be mindful in your day-to-day. So having this sort of long-term fear, this climate anxiety, this sort of climate despondence doesn't cut it when you're trying to instill joy and possibility, and the fact that, again, nothing is promised for them too, so that for them that they have to get up and they have to do something. And I think what's been really sort of critical for me is I have a range of kids. I've got an 11-year-old, and then I've got this COVID 2-year-old. So it just helps you kind of reflect on what's the right message at the right time for these different stages of life. So for the 2-year-old, everything is very concrete. It is, you eat this candy, your tummy's going to hurt. Like, it's just like, what is the concrete connecting of the dots? What's that message that's going to serve me the best for her? And then for the 11-year-old who has much more awareness of what's going on in the world and what her place in it can be, could be, should be, just having the ability to have these kinds of conversations, continuing that message from my heritage, that nothing is promised, and from all of our heritages. And so what are you going to do has been something that's really helped me keep it positive, but also just recognize that we are people of action. We have to take an action, and we hope that that action is going to lead to the benefit of our individual selves, community, and our planet. And that's the best that we can hope for.
Thank you, Neha. Sujani, please.
Yes, thank you. I think for me, it's always been about, you're never too young or too inexperienced to learn about the wicked and complex challenges of our planet. And I think that is something that I think stays with me a lot, like to really, like, how do we include young voices, very young voices, in this continued kind of direction towards solution building. And there was one time where, I got 2 little ones, and when my older one was like around 2, like, he pointed at the car exhaust and he said, "Oh no, Mama, that's not good." And for me, like, that was like a real moment for me, because like, how is it that, a 2-year-old is like recognizing that like this is not good? And it's not like, I sat down with him and we talked about that or anything. It's just like the innocence of like recognizing the challenges. And I think those are really great opportunities to build towards solutions. And I think that's what drives me so much in the education space is because I've never felt like young people were too young to be at the table to have these conversations. And there's always really great ideas there that you just have to facilitate and draw out and like really build on. And it's a great opportunities for us as a society to be able to do that and to introduce some of these like challenges from a young age, and not to harp on it and kind of contribute to more anxiety, but really to flip that and, think about the solutions. And I've always seen like education is, not the filling of a bucket, but a lighting of a fire. And whatever that fire is, to help somebody go forward in that direction and bring meaning in many ways that is built on their own values. I think those are great opportunities for us to come together and kind of start on a new canvas a little bit as much as possible.
Thanks so much, Sujani. And Susan, please.
I mean, I just feel like so grateful to have heard all of the what was just said between all three of you. And so I just want to like name that. I feel like really, really blessed to have heard that. I was thinking about how several years ago, like early on in my career working on the issue of climate change, I saw an article that was like kind of a very small survey and experiment that was run on people who work on environmental issues. And one of the readouts was that many people who work on environment exhibit similar symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was kind of taken aback by that at the time. Of course, now many years later, I can completely understand why that would be the case. And, the fact that we just keep getting hit by the news and, more climate disasters and emissions are still going up and, pollution is terrible. And, all of these things combined, I actually jokingly said to my son the other day, sometimes I wish I knew less about what was going on with climate change, like it would unburden me a little bit. But when I think about, sort of what keeps me going, I would just name a few things. One of those is I continue to be inspired by religious communities that are modeling behavior change and acting on climate because of their values, so even if a project is going to cost a little bit more, they'll invest in it because they say, of course, this is what our faith calls us to do. And so that can be all kinds of things, right? From putting up solar panels to educating their congregants and preaching and teaching on climate, taking care of their land. We know that faiths own an enormous amount of buildings and land, not just in the US, but globally. And that just continues to inspire me, the way that people are acting as models of behavior change in their communities. I would also say that community, like this community, is very important to me. And in fact, in that survey, in that study, they named that people who were able to be in close community with family or colleagues who shared their values on this, that was actually a way of relieving those symptoms of PTSD, and they were less likely to have them. And so I've always thought about how important community is. The staff that I work with, the community of leaders that and colleagues that I get to interact with, and the support of my family in this work is really important to me. And then I would also say that just my own spiritual underpinnings are really important, that without, the ability to read my own scriptures, as well as scriptures from other religious traditions. I do have a personal meditation practice every day, just reminding me to breathe, of course. And I think that is very, very important to me. And just the ability to reflect on gratitude and what I'm grateful for. Because despite how difficult this work can be, there is still so much to be grateful for. Small wins, a little bit of progress, the joy of being with colleagues, so many blessings in my own life that I'm profoundly grateful for. So those are all things that just help maintain some balance, I would say, for myself in this work, because some days are really, really hard. And I think we all know that some days are really hard in this work. But I think when we can share with one another the challenges as well as the celebrations, it goes a long way to supporting each of us in this work.
Susan, thank you so much, because you actually set me up for my next question. I also want to reiterate what's been shared in the chat, that if you do have a question that you'd like to pose to the panel, please just put it in the chat and I'll make sure that it gets communicated. But I did want to ask everyone, if you could talk just a little bit about why this work for you? Like, why this work for you? And what is it that keeps you doing this work? I mean, Susan, you really laid out a beautiful kind of like introduction to this, but why this work?
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to build on that, because there's a lot I didn't say. So I'll tell you why this worked for me, which is when I was serving local congregations for many years, I was working on the issue of hunger. And that was really the issue that I was most passionate about. So in terms of climate and the environment, I was one of those people like siloing my issues, and I was thinking, well, I changed my light bulbs and, we reset our thermostat and I'm, composting and, so you're sort of saying, well, I checked that box, right? Like I'm doing the things and I'm going to work on hunger because that's what I care about. And really, what happened for me was reading an article on the geopolitics of food that just connected the dots for me between, rising food shortages due to drought and wildfire that were fueled by climate change, and global food shortages, rise in food and grain prices, higher conflict that occurred in the world as a result of that. And it was that moment where you realize, like, if I want to make a difference on hunger, I really need to work on climate change. And I think for me, like, once you make that connection, you start connecting the dots, it's hard to unconnect them at that point. You can't like erase your connect the dot picture that you're working on. And so, I started really, because I want to learn, I want to know more. I was in congregations, I wanted to be able to speak to members of the congregation about this. And I started learning so much more about climate and what was happening, what could happen with various scenarios. And I also recognized, because my sons were like preteens at that point in time, I recognized how much more challenging their future was going to be as a result of climate change. And so at that point, it became very personal. It was, I want to be able to look my sons in the eye and say, I saw what was happening and I did everything that I could to work for solutions. And I think for me, it's like once the head and the heart are connected and working in sync with one another, it's really motivating to keep going. Having that personal motivation is what really continues to drive me in this work now, because now my older son's married, they may have kids someday. I'm looking at grandkids, and thinking, yeah, and here's another generation that's going to be impacted. And yet again, not the generation that caused the problem, but the generation that needs us to be working for solutions.
Thanks so much, Susan.
I think for me, I guess, quote unquote, being an environmental steward in the home and kind of in your individual life was never something that I really thought of as anything, because it was just like part of who I was and the way that I was raised and the values that I had growing up. So I never really looked at it as like, you know, like a special thing or like a unique thing. I always just saw it as like the way that one should be. And like that was just my worldview around that. But I think in 2010, when the starfish kind of started to form light, I think what really propelled that was I had taken a course. It was an inquiry-based biodiversity course, and what would happen was we would receive like different environmental challenges each week, and then as a group we had to work towards, you know, like developing a solution for that challenge. But then on top of that, we had to present it in a way that was different and like we felt could be utilized to connect to different people in society. And so I think that really encouraged me to start thinking about, you know, like, why isn't everyone at this table? Like, why isn't everyone doing this work? Like, clearly it's not the case. And so like, how do we connect with people that are not there and that are not at the table and that are not doing this work? Whether it's because it's out of sight, out of mind, or whether it's because of an access related issue or otherwise. So, I mean, originally the work started as like an eco blog where we were just writing to other young people, and you know, like I guess I could call myself young back then, a young person myself, like trying to connect with other young people that might not have had this as part of their worldview growing up. So how could we connect with them, like using kind of science-based, other ways of thinking. And so it sort of evolved from there. And that was kind of like the baseline for the work that I sort of do now is different ways of communicating, different connections, bringing together different ways of thinking for a common goal. And it still surprises me sometimes, like I don't even sometimes want to call myself an environmentalist, because I think the word, like it's just such an intertwined part of my identity that it's just me. And I think that's where like the professional and like personal parts of people's identities are like woven together and like strengthen the work that you do, because it's just so important on many different levels, right? And Susan put it so nicely when she said, you know, when the heart and the mind are aligned. And I just wanted to add one more piece to that, which is the hand. So the heart and the mind are aligned, and then the hand does the work. So there's like that three-way connection between how you think, how you feel, and what you do. And sometimes it just takes a lot of reflection to like piece those out because it might have just always been like that. But I think when you go on the journey to kind of like self-discover that yourself, like you really start to crystallize what's important to you, and it just gets stronger. I think it's always gotten stronger for me over my life, like the need to do this work, never weaker. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. I see Steve, before you come, or Neha, before you come in, I just want to share a question that's come up in the chat, because I know our time is getting a little short. But if you can speak to this in your comments as well. So the statement is, hi, I'm a grad student in my mid-20s, and I've been thinking about whether I even want children, given that I don't know what kind of world I'll bring them into. Apart from that, I'm not sure it's something I want, but of course that doesn't sit well with my Hindu parents. I think adoption makes more sense. I understand this is a personal decision, but any tips for how to think about this issue from an environmentally responsible, ethical way?
So I will certainly try to weave my reflections on that. And thank you so much for the question. So I think it does kind of tie into what I was going to say. So I think my ethos has always been, as a health professional, first, do no harm. So that's sort of always been in the background for any work that I do. And then I think from a faith tradition, the whole concept of karma is not just action, it's also when you are inactive in the face of some injustice, that is also not something that you get away with. You don't get to sit on the sidelines and just say, well, I didn't do it. Did you do something to help? So I think those two thoughts intertwined, or that sort of being the ethos behind any work that I do, I always, in medicine, try to look upstream of that problem that was in my office. So, okay, so we have this condition, what's upstream of that? What's upstream of that? And it always comes back to the environment around us. So I think that that's what, in terms of all of the pieces that don't give me imposter syndrome in my life, which is I'm a primary care doc, I'm a mom, and I'm someone of a tradition that believes that I have to take good action in my life. All of that comes to, I can't just prescribe a pill for every ill. I really need to go as far upstream as I can to try to make an impact on these problems. So I think that for me, this type of work becomes the antidote. And I think, like I mentioned before, with regard to children, very much a personal choice, but the fact that we're all imperfect, I think that recognizing that in myself. So I had two many years ago. I just had one now, when I'm sort of like constantly in my mind is the idea of like climate change and when we found out about her, I think the first thought in my mind was, oh my God, you just blew my carbon footprint like out of the water, like, so just, to be very real and to be very honest, these are honest thoughts, these are honest fears. And that we are all imperfect in all of our actions that we're trying to do, but what are we going to be mindful of as she came into this world? What pieces of her being here actually make me do more with regard to this type of work? How have I cleaned up my household even more because I knew she was coming? What products have we eliminated from our life? So, I think that it is very much a personal decision to think about how do you want to pass on this message and this work to the next generation. But however you choose to do that, know, one, it's never going to be perfect, but two, that you can find a way of doing it that aligns with your values.
Thank you so much, Neha. Steve, you're going to have close to the last words, so I want to hear your reflections. And there's Sujani, welcome back. Just want to ask everyone, something came up in the chat, which was actually my last question, which is, what's the one thing you want to leave our participants and anyone who listens to the session afterwards? What's the one thing, really like bullet, what's the one thing you want to leave people with? So Steve, please, your reflections, and then we'll round robin and then we'll close out.
All right. I think I'll also weave question plus reflections plus last words together, holding space more for you guys because loving the reflections. I've been engaged with Saji since I was 7 years old. And so my bio says 23 years of experience in community-led development. It's absurd. I just turned 30. That should not be on my bio, but I really stand by it in that I've been doing this work since I was 7, right? And I think the thing that inspires me and keeps me doing this work and wanting to really contribute to addressing our triple planetary crisis, right? Because there's so many other things, you could be reforming the macroeconomic system, right? You can be looking at how to reduce imperialism around the world. There's so many things, but this for me, I think speaks closest to my heart in that since I was 7, one of the key things that Saji has done in my life, or that I do for Saji, has been responding to disasters. And every single time we entered community that has been impacted by floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, we see the devastation that is wrought into their lives and the pain that this impermanence brings into their worlds, right? And then there's a little part of me that is oh, I'm so happy we get to be here with you in this moment of pain and help you and give you resourcing that allows you to stand back up on your 2 feet and become a pillar of good in your community. But another large part of me is just why did this have to happen, right? And then not only why did this impermanence have to hit your community, but to see year after year as we're doing this work, that these disasters are intensifying, right? And that the pain is becoming even more profound, right? And that like our ability to really bounce back and recover from like flooding is becoming even larger than the system itself can handle, right? And to recognize that this is the beginning and not the end of our climate crisis alone is enough to like say to myself that like, if I'm not working on this, what kind of world am I building for future generations, right? And to devote my time, energy, and life into like shaping a better world, I think is really like part of like what inspires me. And the second part is just like growing up in like a Buddhist community and to have all these beautiful values around like compassion and care for each other, right? And like interconnectedness, gratitude, respect, and love, right? Foundational things within Saji's universe. And to live in a society that does not reflect those values, there's so much cognitive dissonance to say like, if this is the direction that our society is heading in, and I do not speak out, and I do not work to reshape this society into something that is closer aligned with these values that we know are good for all of humanity and not just for some, I feel like I'd be remiss to say that I had a well-lived and well-examined life, right? So with that, I think that's like Steve inspiration side, right? To come then to the question of like giving birth to your own children and like, what does it mean to adopt and the ethics behind that and like the environmental ethics, right? I would definitely open with, we live in a broken system, right? There's, like Neha was saying, there's no perfect answer. And oftentimes, no matter what answer we choose, we are violating some aspect of like what we believe in, right? Because the systems and structures that we exist in are fundamentally broken, right? And so with that in mind, though, what isn't broken is the communities, the people that we keep in our lives, and the structures that we create ourselves, right? So perhaps in addition to the ethical consideration of, do I bring another child into this world, right, is the question of, do I have the communities, do I have the environment where they would feel, instead of feeling the eco-anxiety and climate dread, but they would feel the love and care of humanity, that they would feel like they're in a safe space to grow, explore, be playful, and to be a child. And when they are ready to take action to help the world be a better place, if they so choose, right? Not to put the pressure of saving the world on the next generation, but rather to say that we're working to save the world. Are we also simultaneously creating an ecosystem and environment amongst our peers and communities that is loving and reflective of our values? If we can do that, then I think the ethical argument of bringing another life into this world is a little less intense, right? Because you may know you live in a broken system, but you can model a better future in reality, and that they become a champion of that as well. And then final thoughts, just in terms of like to take away from this space, I think we've shared a lot of knowledge that has come forth from wisdom of our different traditions, from our own lived experience, right? And so it's really exciting to like be amongst like colleagues that are like doing really great work, right? But the knowledge that we've shared today will only exist as thoughts unless we take action, right? So I would call upon everyone in your own ways to find ways to translate this inspiration, translate this knowledge, and translate these ideas into your own wisdom by taking imperfect action and learning from those experiences.
Thanks so much, Steve. And Neha, Sujani, Susan, your final thoughts.
I think I'll just add on to Steve. That's going to be my go-to, even when Steve's not around. I'm going to add on to what Steve has said previously, but I think that, yeah, it's sort of, for me, the final thought would be just growing that circle of influence. So wherever it is, wherever you find yourself, whatever space you're in, if you're only able to do it in your home environment, great. If you're able to do it in your home and then pass that knowledge on to a loved one, someone who's younger, and they are able to then take action for broader cause, wonderful. Whatever you're, just try to grow that sphere as much as you are able to, hopefully, and in a way that's joyful. I think that's the other piece of all of our traditions, is that everything we're doing, it's meant to be for the joy of ourselves and for others. So taking that action and doing it with joy and devotion to something bigger than yourself.
Thank you, Neha. Sujani, thank you.
Yes, I would add, now my go-to is going to be, I'd like to add to what Steve and Neha have said, and Susan, is is you don't have to wait for all the answers to take that action. And I think, building on what Neha said, where you find joy, where your skills are, like there's a great intersect right there where you can take action like almost immediately. And whether that is in your home, whether that's on an individual level, whether that's like a little bit outside of your home in your community, like there's lots of opportunities, and to position oneself as like a solutions-oriented thinker, I think is a really powerful tool to have, because it really does help. It helps in many ways, but it also helps on the inside, because you can put that energy towards something meaningful.
Thank you so much. And Susan, you will have the final word.
Yeah, my go-to is just always going to be ditto. The thing that came to my mind is just that we have agency, and, find your place of power and take action. And I think that just encapsulates hopefully what others have shared, what my colleagues have shared here. We have agency.
Susan, Neha, Sujani, Steve, thank you all so much for such a rich conversation. Gopal will never let me moderate anything because we went over, but we were having a good time, so I thought it was important. So thank you all for joining us live for this session. For those of you who watch it on recording, thank you for taking the time to restore yourself and to think about what is that next action for you to take in your participation with these crises or opportunities. Gopal, I'm turning this back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark, and to all the speakers. Quite on the contrary, Mark, I think as always, you did an excellent job. We could go on for like another hour and a half, and I think we will definitely be asking you to come back, and always your support and love for us at Bhumi Global is reciprocated. Thank you so much for everything. Sujani, Neha, Steve, and Susan, thank you so much. You are some of my closest friends, and such a wonderful, rich, nourishing, inspiring conversation. Thank you all for your time and wisdom today. We are going to take a short break now for about 10 minutes as we prepare for the next session, which will be focused on how the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed in the United States, how that will benefit and how it can benefit Dharmic communities. And we have 4 elected government representatives from different parts of the country to talk about that. So really moving into the practical action, at least here in the United States context, of what can we do as communities working with the government now with this act that was passed. So we'll be starting that in about 10 minutes. But again, Mark, Sujani, Neha, Steve, and Susan, thank you again for all of your wisdom, thoughts, leaving very nourished and inspired. And we'll see you all again in about 10 minutes time. Thank you. Thank you for being back with us. We are very excited for the next panel to start. This next panel will be looking at how the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed recently here in the United States can benefit Dharmic communities. And we have a wonderful lineup of elected representatives and officials to help us think through and explain how the act can help our Dharmic communities across the country. And we have a wonderful member of the Bhumi Global Advisory Council to host and moderate this session. I'll ask her to join the session now, and then I'll give her a short introduction, and then she will introduce all of the panelists. So our moderator for this session will be Harshita Mira Venkatesh, who serves as a business fellow in a climate technology accelerator called the Breakthrough Energy Fellows Program. As part of her day-to-day work, she helps to support the commercial journey of early-stage climate innovations in hard-to-abate sectors such as cement, steel, and fertilizers. She's a graduate of UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and is currently based out of Oakland, California. And as I mentioned, she is also an advisor to Bhumi Global. So we are very honored and excited for Harshita to be with us today to moderate this really important conversation. Harshita, I'll hand it over to you so that you can introduce the other panels and set the context for the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. So my name is Harshita. I'll be the moderator for this event. And right before we get started, I wanted to introduce our rock star set of panelists. So we have, I should also note that one of our panelists is running a little bit late, but at the end of the panel, we should have State Senator Van Gopal from New Jersey. We have State Representative Padma Kupa from Michigan. We have Virginia State Representative Siva Subramanian, and we also have New York State Assembly Member Jennifer Rajkumar. So it's a very diverse group, and what we're really hoping from this panel is to sort of get a local understanding of how this massive federal climate bill will sort of reverberate through various communities, including Dharmic communities, including the communities that these panelists represent. So just to set some context, so the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, is a landmark piece of legislation that was actually passed earlier this summer in August. And it was passed as part of the larger Build Back Better initiative. And if it seems a little bit new to you, that's because there was so much back and forth discussion. It was sort of passed with with a lot of last minute consensus. And that's really, I think, what makes this bill extraordinary. And while this bill includes everything from affordable care subsidies to tax measures to prescription drug reform measures, I think arguably the most notable feature of the bill is the fact that it authorized approximately $369 billion, and some project up to $400 billion to energy and climate change initiatives. And that makes it the largest spending bill in human history devoted to climate. So there's so much to unpack in this bill, but today's panel will focus less on the nitty-gritty of it, and will sort of be a higher level discussion on how this bill could sort of benefit the communities that our panelists represent, and also just Dharmic communities at large. So it'll be more of a narrative-based conversation, and we really hope that that everybody who's watching will really understand, the perspectives of certain individuals, but it'll also help them look a little bit deeper into the bill so they can sort of make their own inference afterwards, because there is a lot. So I think I'm just going to get it kicked off. Let's actually do it this way. So for the first question, I gave a quick round of introductions, but if you could just start with a one-liner about yourself and also an answer to the first question, I think that could sort of help get things moving, and also remind people who you are, who you represent, what your perspectives are. So first question's very open-ended. Would love to just hear your thoughts. So there's just so much to unpack with respect to the IRA, but what's one key feature or one key clause of the bill that caught your attention? It could be anything that pertains to your community, could just be something that you found fascinating, or it could pertain to Dharmic communities. It's really something that just caught your eye with respect to this bill. And let's actually start, and I'll sort of do it popcorn style, so we don't all Zoom interrupt each other. So I'll start with Representative Kupa. Could you just unmute yourself and get started?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be on this panel, and having been a friend to Bhumi for so long, just want to talk about what you asked, which is what's one feature of the IRA that particularly caught your attention? I serve on tax policy in the Michigan legislature. We have committees, and so tax reforms and the transformative tax reforms here in the IRA are really, really important. These tax reforms will help to fund U.S. energy security, climate resiliency initiatives, and it's actually a 3-year expansion of the Affordable Care Act, alongside a reduction of the federal deficit. None of this would be possible without the tax reforms that are here. They're really focused on large corporations, finally getting them to contribute their fair share, and also enforcement of current tax codes. We have a lot of loopholes, both in the state legislature, but especially at the federal level. And this will not increase. So this is really important to me, is that we do not increase taxes on middle and working class families, working class individuals, and small businesses. So many small businesses will benefit from from this while we get those who aren't paying their fair share to pay it?
Thanks so much, Representative Kupa. And I think you said it perfectly. I mean, this is an act to really protect the most vulnerable populations to inflation, while at the same time combating some of our society's greatest issues. So really excited to sort of see how it unfolds in your state. I'm going to sort of jump to now Assembly Member Rajkumar. Would love to just hear your thoughts on sort of like a fascinating aspect of this bill that you'd love to unpack for all of us.
Absolutely. Hello, and thank you to Bhumi Global for having me. Happy Diwali to everybody. It's also really great to see my colleague, Representative Kupa, today, and I'm a huge fan of hers. Well, to answer your question, what really struck me about the Inflation Reduction Act was what it says about healthcare. So thanks to the IRA, seniors will spend no more than $2,000 a year on prescription drugs. So in other words, there's a cap, and that cap is going to be phased in over time. So as someone from a family of all doctors, it's always the healthcare delivery affordability that I always tend to hone in on, and what we're doing for health and wellness. So the IRA is also benefiting health in another way. It's actually going to save about 4,000 lives in 8 years by the year 2030. And you might ask how? Well, it's by a little known provision that will actually reduce particles from dirty fuels. So these are significant health benefits in the act. And along with that is actually a cap on insulin prices. Additionally, it's also extending the Affordable Care Act's premium subsidies that will lower the cost of health insurance from now until 2024. They were due to expire at the end of 2022. So approximately 3 million Americans would have lost their health insurance if these subsidies were not renewed. And thankfully, the IRA renews it. So I think it's very significant, even though we're always talking about what the IRA is doing for climate justice, which is significant, reducing carbon emissions by 40% in 8 years. There's also a lot that's happening for the health of the American population.
Thank you so much. And I think thanks so much for highlighting this aspect around health, because that's really what the bill focuses on. I mean, climate can't really be disentangled from human health, and human health also can't be disentangled from just like the more direct contributors to human to sort of just greater wellness. So I think, you know, what you said is very interrelated to sort of some of the larger themes that we're discussing as well. And now let's actually jump to Representative Subramanian. Would love to just hear your thoughts on sort of a distinct feature of the IRA that really caught your eye.
Thank you. First of all, it's great to be here with all of you, Jennifer, Padman, and Harjitha. It's very honored to be part of this, and thank you to Bhumi Global for all the amazing work you do. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. The Inflation Reduction Act is there's a lot in there that's great. I think going last, you always, the previous speakers always take up the good points, and I think Padma and Jennifer really hit it on the nail, some of the great things in this. I like the fact that Medicare can now negotiate drug prices. So that means, think of if you had to go to a car dealership and you knew that the cost of the car was double what it's actually worth, but you had to buy it, you had no choice, and you couldn't negotiate it to what it's closer to what it's worth. That's what our healthcare system has really been, over the past many decades. And that's why a big reason why drug prices are high. And I did so much at the state level to try to reduce it, but in the end, I kept telling people that really the way to do it is federal action. And so we at least got some federal action finally on the books to help, lower prices in a really common sense way. And that's another thing I really like about it is there's a lot of common sense for that are going to really help the American people. We're supposed to be a leader on clean energy, but we haven't really made the investments necessary to do that or be that. we've just kind of sat back and hoped that the private sector and the market will dictate that, and it's starting to. But there's some big investments we need to make, and this starts making them. For instance, it's great that we have EV companies popping up making electric cars, but if we don't have a network of charging stations, then it's going to be difficult for it to make sense long term. But that does a lot of good, not just for the environment, but really for our bottom line as a country. So there's a lot of great things in here that are common sense and that are good for everyone. And I know a lot of Republicans who maybe voted against it even, but secretly are like, oh, I'm really glad some of this stuff is in there. I've been trying to advocate for it for a long time.
No, well said. Well said. I mean, as you said, there's for the longest time, industry was sort of seen as the standard bearer for any of this large sort of macroscopic change. But that's really what this bill does. It doesn't take away that sense of accountability, but it's sort of industry led but government enabled, and I think that's the beauty of it that caught my eye. And now I think we've heard a lot about sort of healthcare affordability, sort of giving back to the middle class, and then we've also heard about sort of how this will also benefit climate as a result of a lot of these measures. But sort of given the theme of this panel, I'd love to sort of pivot a little bit to just the grander relationship between some of these measures and just the spirit of this bill and religious communities, particularly Dharmic and Hindu communities. And the relationship may not be sort of trivially apparent, but there are many ways that this bill can either sort of directly or indirectly benefit the aforementioned communities. And there are also ways that are the value systems aligned between what we're trying to achieve. So let's actually start by sort of unpacking. And if you don't have an answer for this, would just love to just hear your overall thoughts on this. But let's start unpacking some of the ways this may directly impact some of the institutions that serve these communities. And if there isn't a clause that appeals to, let's actually just switch to the alignment of the larger value systems. How do you think this aligns with the value systems that we're trying to espouse here at Bhumi, and that the larger Dharmic or Hindu community in the United States is trying to sort of achieve cohesively? Let's actually, since we started with Representative Kupa, let's actually start with let's start with Representative Subramanian. I'll sort of give the mic back to you since you started last.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I think the question was how is the IRA going to benefit Hindu communities and Dharma communities, and how maybe it reflects the values of those communities. And I think certainly I live in Northern Virginia, where there's Hindu communities are the largest growing communities in the state, and fastest growing rather. And a lot of people here are the contractors and even people in the federal government who will be implementing this bill. So certainly from an economic perspective, here in Virginia, it's going to be a huge boon. But it's the communities, the Hindu community here also has the expertise to be able to implement this, and it's just been sitting on the sidelines waiting for the investments to happen. So from a direct dollars and cents perspective, it's pretty clear to me how this is going to help us. As far as our values, I mean, I've been on. I've heard a lot about how the kind of ties between environmentalism and Hinduism, and the ties between taking care of your neighbor and taking care of each other, and Hinduism as well. And I grew up going to Hindu Sunday school, Shimai Somnath, and we learned all those values growing up. But in the policy making, sometimes I feel like we talk a big game, but we don't actually put money behind it. But the IRA is essentially saying, okay, we understand these values, and whether you're Hindu or Christian or Muslim, like in the end, we all share very similar values, but we're actually going to invest in these values. We're going to invest in protecting workers. We're going to invest in protecting our environment, invest in protecting our healthcare healthcare of our brothers and sisters and neighbors. And so I think it certainly reflects the values of our community.
Thank you so much. That was so well put. And I agree. It does reflect the values of our community, taking care of ourselves, taking care of the people around us, and taking care of our planet. So now I'll give the mic to Assembly Member Rajkumar. Would love to just hear your thoughts on this question.
Absolutely. Well, speaking to the first part of your question, there are some significant direct benefits of the IRA. And one of those is simply tax credits, including, very strikingly, solar tax credits. And these solar tax credits are going to be available to both homeowners and also to nonprofits. So a 30% tax credit will be available for families who install solar roof panels. Solar roof panels are actually very expensive. It costs around $19,000 just to install solar roof panels on your house. So it's really significant that there's going to be a 30% tax credit to do this. And also, as I pointed out, nonprofits will also be eligible for a solar tax credit. So that may very well affect many of our dharmic institutions. The IRA also has other tax credits built in as well. For example, tax credits for entities that are producing low emission vehicles or organizations that are spurring clean energy production. And along with tax credits, the IRA also has built in it grants. There are climate and environmental justice block grants, which will fund community projects that address environmental and public health issues. And I'll be very curious to see where those grants flow. Hopefully they will flow to some dharmic-oriented institutions, and that could be a huge opportunity for our community. But also, speaking to your other question about what does this mean in a larger sense for dharmic communities, I think that being environmentally conscious is very much aligned with dharmic spiritual values. We all know about Mahatma Gandhi, who famously renounced all his worldly possessions except for 5 possessions. So I think dharmic values promote the idea of not being too attached to material goods and not being too materialistic, being in tune with nature and kind of a living an environmentally conscious life. I have been a vegetarian since college because I was so inspired by reading Gandhi and that link to social justice. And vegetarianism actually has a link to environmental justice. The plant-based diet is more sustainable, and it's well known that cattle and sheep actually emit greenhouse gas and require a major habitat destruction for grazing and have really high water demands. And finally, I will point out that there was significant flooding in South Asia. This year's floods in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh were fueled by climate change. So it's very much kind of very important for our community to address the issue of climate justice, which the IRA does so finely.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Rajkumar. Let's actually go. Let's finish with our final panelist to get her thoughts on the matter.
Sure, thank you. It is nice to be here with 2 fellow colleagues in the state legislature. Suhas, I think this is our first time together on a panel, maybe our second, but Jennifer, it's good to see you again as well, to hear both of you speak to these issues from both a legislative perspective, but also from a lawmaker perspective, but also from the dharmic perspective or the Hindu perspective. I do want to just point out one thing, which is that the IRA dramatically increases the deductions that commercial buildings can take when they're energy efficient. It really, these changes in the IRA, they're related to the design of commercial buildings owned by tax exempt entities, which includes dharmic and other religious organizations. But I know that there's a lot of nonprofits, not just dharmic, but broader, owned by people who are immigrants. And so making sure that they take advantage of those deductions is important. So get in touch with your tax preparer if you have a building that you own that you're part of a tax exempt entity. And this is in addition to the current eligibility, which currently only includes commercial buildings. As an engineer, for me, I always paid a lot of attention to LEED certification and making sure that the city buildings and a lot of the other buildings that I was involved with as a planning commissioner, that we paid attention to the environmental footprint of these buildings. And so we have some really fantastic examples of green building here in the city of Troy. It would be nice to see our Mandirs also do things like that, take steps to be more green. The other thing is that, to reiterate what Assemblywoman Rajkumar said, please investigate if your nonprofit or your religious organization can get that direct payment of the direct payment from the federal government up to 30% of the solar installation cost. Because I think that's a really good way, as houses of worship are bringing people back after the pandemic, because membership was not able to come, and making sure that as they come back, they have the money to sustain and pay the bills, whether it's for the staff at the temple, the priests, or for daily operational expenses. Getting this money back will really help to defray some of those costs and fill in the gaps as devotees come in and put money in the donation box or the hundi or whatever. So I think that's really important. And then I will say, I know that the next question kind of talks to how our value systems benefit because of going green, and the IRA and the promotion of clean energy and all the things that we care about. I myself am a lifetime vegetarian. I've tried, but it just, just knowing the impact, not only from like the perspective of ahimsa, but also from the perspective of the impact on the planet. I'm glad that we're talking about these issues, that there's more of us who are speaking to these issues.
Thank you so much. And I love that you mentioned LEED certification, because it's definitely something I look at in my day-to-day work. And one other provision of the bill that will be helping green buildings, for instance, dharmic institutions, is a provision to remove embodied carbon in the actual cement of the building, to sort of, and that's perhaps, like, if you talk about indirect emissions, that's probably the biggest footprint. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And our next question, I think Assembly Member Rajkumar touched on it already, but this is probably my favorite question of the panel. So let's definitely take our time to unpack this, which is really one of the key tenets underpinning the IRA was this idea of environmental justice and environmental equity. So the bill intentionally has provisions aimed at bringing along communities that have been traditionally left out of the energy transition, or that may feel like they will be displaced professionally because of it. And it also really focuses on basically creating measures in a way such that communities that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change, or will be disproportionately impacted in the future, such as low-income communities, minority communities, will really be the targets of some of these beneficial provisions. And I was actually thinking, like, speaking to some of just the larger tenets of Hinduism and what some of our religious institutions preach, I think for the longest time, they were the stewards of what is, a minority community in the United States, like, at least from a religious standpoint. And I think that this bill really helps sort of align that value system as well, but would love to just unpack the idea of environmental equity around this bill, and also just the climate justice provisions that that gets you excited, for your community and for the country at large. Since Assemblymember Rajkumar briefly touched on it, would love to hand the mic back to her to get started on this particular question.
Sure, great. I mean, it is very exciting. The IRA will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 gigaton. And as we all know, by 40% compared to our 2005 level. So it really puts us on the track to reach our emission goals. And what's going to be great is that when we combine this federal action with state action, we can see astronomical results. Here in New York State, we have a bill in the legislature that I have co-sponsored. It's called the Build Public Renewables Act. And what it does is it transitions the New York State Power Authority to operating to all clean energy. So if we combine what the IRA is doing with what we're doing at the state level, we can see some really aggressive action and hopefully results to combat the climate crisis. So this is hugely exciting. But getting to your point about how this affects communities of color, it's well known that communities of color are historically impacted worse by pollution. For example, here in New York City, in Harlem, asthma rates are higher. And that's because in Harlem, there are more pollution emitting facilities that are sited there. And there's less green space in many communities of color, which create heat islands. So over here in my district, in Richmond Hill, our South Asian areas have a lot less green space. So I'm very interested in the IRA's grants because the bill promises these block grants that are going to be distributed and will help communities of